Going to call this meeting to order. Sorry, are we ready? Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. This is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019, and this is the Superintendent's Workshop. We are currently holding this meeting in the Joe N. Idelette Junior Teacher Education Center, and I would like to remind the public that they are always welcome to come and attend these workshops in person, and we are located at 6500 57th Street. And I just really do encourage individuals to make it out and attend these meetings with us. At this time, this meeting is scheduled to go from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Moxley.
Good afternoon, board members. This afternoon, we actually have 4 items. 2 are reports. One is the HR or Human Resources presentation that was delayed from a previous meeting. So we'll start with that this afternoon. And then the attendance presentation was one that we had scheduled actually back over the summer, and it got postponed, and then we had staff that were out for the summer. And everybody's back now. We wanted to make sure that we caught up with our list of items that we wanted to make sure that the board had your updates on, and they have made that current with that. And then we have 2 policies that I am bringing for action to start the process tonight. And then the 4th one is a policy that, at the request of Dr. Schiff, we wanted to have a conversation. There won't be action on that one tonight, but that'll be for point of discussion. As we start with the Human Resources presentation, there's actually 2 parts to this. One has to do with one of our school board policies. That's 3120.01. It's called recruitment and retention of a diverse employment staff. And as part of that policy, there is an annual report that is prescribed in that particular policy. So Mr. Osipian will provide that annual report data as outlined by this policy. I do have a copy of the policy if you're not familiar with that policy. Mr. Osipian does reference that in the presentation, but I do have that here. Should you want a copy of that, I have that to provide to you. And then we will also give you an update, if you will, on the Human Resources Department, some of the priorities, some of the things that projects they have going. Some of the items are listed in our FAD study, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Osipian.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, school board members, Superintendent Moxley. Thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation as Superintendent referenced. It is an all-inclusive look at what we do within the HR department, and I hope to give you guys some insights of where HR is going in the future and some priorities that we have in front of us. So our human resources team is broken up into 12 full-time staff members. We have 2 part-time staff members. Staff has changed over the years. 2 of our positions, actually 3 inclusive of myself, had been added or filled during this past school year. So for example, in July, one of our personnel record specialists was a full-time position. Ms. Michelle Olk came on board in March, and myself most recently came in September 7th, I think was my first start day, or September 9th. So just a little bit over a month. But as you can see, there has been some reduction of staff. I believe back in 08-09, there was a reduction of about 3 staff members. But we are an all-inclusive staff. A team has done a great job in the absence of the assistant superintendent maintaining the heartbeat of the district in that capacity. So I thank them for that work and that effort. Speaking from a building principal perspective, anytime a key member is without in an organization, it does put an awful lot of work as well as certain priorities that may or may not be able to be accomplished during those things. I know when my assistant principal was out or when I was off campus, it did create some challenges. So with me at the helm, I'm happy to say that we are a team, we're a family, and I have a great staff to continue and support the HR efforts of the district and to continue to prioritize, evaluate, and look at effective processes and systems of support for all of our employees. So to start, Human resources, and some of the things that we do, it's broken up into these different categories. From recruitment to retention, hiring processes, which include onboarding, certification, evaluations, employee labor relations, and compliance procedures policies. Some of the things that change on a year-to-year basis is our statutes. Florida statutes, we look at federal changes, state mandates, and within the HR department, we need to ensure that compliance is maintained on all those efforts. Certification has been a topic of statute over the last 2 years. How do we get teachers certification faster? There was a backlog in DOE. But also different statute changes from temporary, provisionary statute that allowed some of our temporary teachers to fulfill compliance within certain timeframes. So our certification department does a great job in ensuring that, one, we are following up with Department of Education. We look at our annual certification efforts to ensure those things are in compliance, as well as sometimes we have alternative certification and what that looks like in that roadmap. Evaluations is a big part of what we do, from the Marzano tool, looking at how we can support both administrators and teachers within those efforts, and looking at how we can improve our teacher handbook, and through the collective bargaining agreements, how we can continuously look at what works best for teachers to support our students. We're continuing to gain that trust and that positive employee relations. I look at employee relations as a number one priority within our organization, because if we have great employee relations, everything else trickles from there. So we're constantly looking at how can we improve trust, transparency, and communication through those venues. And then finally, recruitment retention. Over the last several weeks, recruitment retention has been a topic, whether that be through the Equity Committee as well as within our efforts. So hopefully I can provide some clarity as to some of the recruitment efforts that have gone on in the past and what we're currently doing this upcoming school year, or this school year. And then finally, the onboarding process. How are we looking at our hiring process to ensure that it is simple, it is easy, it's streamlined, so that there isn't a delay between an offer as well as that onboarding of that personnel? What we've accomplished. When I came on board, what was nice to see is that a lot of the processes that are in place here streamline that process. Through online onboarding, it allows employees not to have to chase down paper or complete forms and things that sometimes are a tedious method within the HR department, so that an employee can upload things, they can do their online training, and they can really start from start to finish in a very timely manner. AppleTrack is a system that creates efficiencies in regards to requisitions, allows employees to go and look at our online vacancies, as well as it allows us to really streamline and promote the employment within the county. Our ASOP, we have over 280 active substitutes within the county. We take care of all the onboarding, all the training, all the clearance, to ensure that we have a staff fulfilling within our employment, so that if teachers or staff members are out, we're able to fill those voids. Our online job descriptions have been constantly updated. We're always looking at how we can improve those as jobs change over the last 5 years, 10 years. Are there job descriptions that are outdated? Are there ones that need to be changed or just removed? And then finally, topic of conversation has been exit surveys and stay surveys. What are those? What impact do they play? We started those back in May of 2007, the exit surveys. And what those are really looked to do is to gauge why do employees leave? Is it for better offers? Is it for the same offers? Is it because they're dissatisfied with the current employment? And how we can use that data to help curb or change the behaviors within the organization. The way that those are structured or formatted is at the end of any type of payroll structure, if there is an employee that is no longer going to be in service, those surveys are sent out to them every payroll cycle. For our stay surveys, we are trying to, within a 12 to 14 month period, survey every staff member between that 12 to 14 month period, and that will be a continuous cycle. We have most recently, in September, looked at our employees from 11 years to 20 years. And then upcoming in December, we will be sending that same survey out to employees over 21 years. In that cycle, every 4 months, there'll be a different group of employees that are contained in that. What that survey really looks at is more the culture, whether it be within the department, whether it be within their own place of employment. It also looks at what it is important to them. Why do they want to stay in their job? And then also, are they satisfied or dissatisfied with potentially the leadership of the organization or even within their school or department? Just looking at some of the data, this data was pulled as of September 20th. Some more current data I have, and the numbers have slightly changed or varied. Our new hires, we actually have 84 for instructional, support staff 16, and then new hires under administrative of 8, and we no longer have a vacancy. Sometimes when you look at vacancies, you think to yourself, well, why do we have that many vacancies?
Can you repeat that?
Mm-hmm. New hires instructional, 84. And I'll send you guys an updated slide as well so you guys can have all the current numbers. That's not a problem. New hires support staff 16, and then new hires administrative 0. Or I'm sorry, 8. And then the vacancies are 0. Sometimes when you look at the number of vacancies, it can be alarming. But I can assure you sometimes you see vacancies, but it's not necessarily a vacancy that is not being pursued, or it is not currently in the process of being filled. It's just a vacancy because the onboarding process has not been completed. So within that 16 vacancies, there could be 5 to 7 or 8 that have been interviewed, selected, and we are currently going through the process to get them onboarded and started. And that would go for all those. To give some comparative data, if you look to our neighbors to the south, currently they have approximately 30 vacancies. And if you look at our neighbors to the north, they have over 75 vacancies in instructional.
Can I just get a point of clarification that you're talking about since the beginning of this school year?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, and maybe I have one more question about vacancies in general. We have in the past had community members who would see a vacancy number and be very concerned about that and would say, how do you have 30 classrooms without a teacher in them? Because that's what they see when they see vacancy. And as a parent, one might assume that. Is there any way to communicate that information better when we're even doing something like this, where this can be grabbed off the internet and then brought to a board meeting perhaps and say, you have 30 vacancies.
Sure.
You know, how do we do a better job of explaining some of those things? I don't need an explanation right now, but just a thought to that, to communicating that properly, because what you've added is important.
Yeah, and not only that, but sometimes you see vacancies like you say and say, well, who's in the classroom? Well, we have highly qualified substitutes, and any time we may have a vacancy where it might be a hard to fill vacancy, we always try to find the best qualified. It could be a retired teacher, it could be someone that already has certification, a long-term sub, but we always have people in those places. But like you said, sometimes that perspective or perception is who's teaching the kids, and we always have people in those classrooms. So. So when you look at retention of staff, nationwide, when you look at any type of organization, or if you're comparing all different types of occupations, you typically look at nationally in 17.8 to 18% industry standard of turnover. Anytime you have a retention rate above 90%, you're in a very, very good place, and that speaks to the culture and the things going on within the district. What I'd love to see that at 95%, 100%, but sometimes we can't avoid when spouses have to go to different counties for work, or we have to have retirements, or just circumstances that are beyond our control. So I always look at 90% as a great retention rate. Nationwide for teachers, there is a 16% turnover rate, and if you look at our retention rate, as you can see, it is above that at that 90% for our instructional. So we're keeping our teachers. Our goal is always to get the highest qualified. If you look at 90% instructional retention, one thought as well is that, as you know, in any organization, we also have low performers. So within that retention rate as well, how are we supporting our low performers, or are we coaching them to other careers? Because sometimes that retention rate also looks at how we can have the highest qualified employees within our organization, and that sometimes might mean helping coach other people to other careers. Yes, ma'am.
But the
these numbers here, you're saying that are you saying that these numbers, 90% overall retention is accomplished now at this point? Have we looked at years prior so that we can compare what one year looks like to another year?
Yeah, I didn't include this within that, but that is something, at the purview of the board that I can pull the last 5 years, that
I'm interested in,
longevity.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm so interested about this next slide.
All right,
'Cause
so.
I have a real question about the title of this slide, so I'm curious how you present it.
So how do we serve our customers? So within the day-to-day of HR, sometimes people may question, well, what does HR actually do? And you see people on desks, you see people in offices, but what we really do is, whether it be phone calls to help employees, help people apply online, help people go through the AppleTrack software, certification, making sure that we're sending out notices, making sure that we're in compliance, out-of-field reports, letters to ensure that those things are taken care of, as well as verification of employment, unemployment claims, and fingerprint processing. All those things take time, and time from staff. And the way that I look at it is, we are a very busy department that serves our customers sometimes through that facility. And we are able to take care of those things because we have efficient and effective processes in place that allows us to do those things. So this is just more of a slide to show some of the workload or some of the things that we do take into account with some of the staff.
So may I ask a question? So it says how we serve our customers. Our customers, and when I say our, because I think of all of us together, our customers are students and families.
Sure.
I understand what your perspective of we serve our customers because our employees are the customers of HR, but in theory, they're part of our school family. They're part of our school district family. So it's how we serve our family, right? How we serve our staff, how we serve our family, but always focused on the customer being the student and the parent or the guardian. I think it's a philosophical thing. I've seen this said before, and I understand how HR works a little bit, but I just want to say, from my perspective, I think it's important for human resources, even within the district office, for every department within the district office to function with the student and the family as the primary customer. It's just that's who we serve. That is who we serve. So I understand this.
Oh, yeah. And philosophically, I agree with you 100%. Our customers, our families, our kids. Why are we here? We're here for kids to learn. By having effective, efficient processes for employees, that allows teachers to be in the classroom. That allows, not to have to worry about an FMLA paperwork and I can't focus on my classroom, so we're going to make sure that we take that load off. So I agree with you. Everything that we do is interrelated to the quality of the service of the teacher, because if a teacher's frustrated, if they're worrying about a leave, if they're worrying about this, they're not going to be able to serve their kids the most. So I agree with you. We serve our customers, which is everybody, but we do it through that capacity of improving our employees. So recruitment. We have...
I'm going to go back and...
Sure.
Did you finish going through that slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Question?
No?
Okay. So recruitment. The next couple of slides that you're going to see deal with recruitment. Recruitment, I've been in 3 different counties. This is my 3rd. And recruitment is the top of everyone's conversation. How do we get teachers? There's a teacher shortage in the state of Florida. How do we have the best? How do we continue to get the best? When I look at the Indian River County School District's plan for recruitment, I think it is a very inclusive plan, from utilizing all the different opening postings, whether it be Indeed or LinkedIn or Handshake, the in-house job fair. We already have scheduled our 2020 job fair, which is going to be on March 13th. We are always looking at ways as what are the students coming out of college utilizing for employment. A lot of the colleges now are using Handshake, which is a way for us to know about the different recruitment fairs. Indeed is a great way to continue to get employees, but what is the best ways to get employees? Because it's always changing, and technology is a key to that change. So we do your traditional, looking at the recruitment and presentations at local colleges, fine arts recruitment, nurses. We have a national nursing website that we post on, as well as that. So that's some of the traditional things that we do, as well as the technology-based. If you take a look at some of the job fairs, the Great Florida Teach-In, I've been going to that for the last several school years. And what I found is when there used to be 3,000, 4,000 people attend, this past year, I think it was around 600 people, 700 people. And that is the biggest job fair, and every 50, 60 districts are there. But when you have an in-house job fair, you have people that want to come to your county. Some of the district strategies and where you're even placed in those job fairs, you can have an applicant walk in and they're given a job right away and they walk out. They don't necessarily go to all the counties. So I believe the more things that we can do in-house in regards to job fairs locally, as well as creating good established partnerships with all of our local colleges, whether that be through internships, as well as how can we onboard those people that graduate. And we already know what we're doing, what they need, how we can help and coach them up. Those are tools that I think are going to continue the recruitment efforts. This past year, we also targeted, as we know that our minority recruitment is huge, and we want to continue in those efforts. If you take a look at the bold, and I'm going to move this, there you go. So the bold are historically black colleges and universities. If you take a look, last year we attended several of those universities, and this is looking like our 1920 school year. I've reviewed Pinellas County's recruitment and their plan to help, recruit a diverse employment. And comparing their plan to ours, last year during their school year, they, I believe, based on the report I looked at, went to 2 historically black colleges and universities. Last year, we went to over 5 or 6, I believe. So if you take a look at that's a much larger district, much larger budget. And if you take a look at what we're doing, we are really trying to impact and look at how we can continue to increase our recruitment of minority educators. So for this upcoming school year, we've already gone to Edward Waters College. Was a college that we've, over several years, tried to get into. This past, within the last month, we went there, and we already have a candidate. So this is the first year that we have been able to get into that college recruitment fair, and we already are having some fruit from that labor. Mr. Zire?
So I just wanted to know, I have a question about this, but I just wanted to know if in the presentation that you're providing for us today, are we seeing a plan or an overall new vision for the human resources? And are the recommendations from FADS within this plan? Because I have some questions, but I just wanted to know where we were in terms of
It's both.
comparing both. Okay.
Yeah, it's both. It's an overview, and then at the end, you'll see some of those things that are addressed within that.
So with the last couple of slides and this one here that you presented to us, something that was I want to say issue, only because it has been brought up, but it has never been implemented that I know of. I've been asking prior to Dr. Moxley coming in, when we had and of course, obviously, before you were here, Mr. Osipian, when we had a job fair in, I'm going to say January or February, it's probably January, I believe it was an in-house job fair. There weren't a lot of candidates that showed up who were interested, but of those that showed up, I was told, I think about 4 or 5, there were just a handful of people who received a letter of intent. And so my immediate request was, I'd like to see the sign-in sheet, and I'd like to see, of that sign-in sheet, how many were black and brown minority teachers, and how can we track that many coming in, how many were given a letter of intent, how many of those were black and brown teachers. And so my focus then was, of course I didn't get anything because apparently I was told we didn't do it. But my understanding of that, as the conversations took place then, was we need to prepare in advance for trying to get ourselves out of this legal mess that we're in with regards to minority recruitment. And one of the ways that we can get there is to ensure that our processes include what happens at these job fairs. And that's, I'm not sure if my question is really a question or rather a statement. What I'd like to see here is, this is great that we're going to these places, but I'd like to see more of an outline for when these are happening. Maybe not, it's not a going through it with a fine tooth and comb, but it's trying to be able, as a school board member, to articulate exactly what we're doing.
Sure. So
Am I making sense here?
yeah, I think you've made some statements,
Yeah.
and not necessarily questions, but I'll try to answer them in regards to clarify some of those things. So last year we offered approximately, and give or take, 40 letters throughout the whole school year. Of those 40 letters, I believe that we had 5 or 6 that actually accepted and were moved into positions. Sometimes what happens is we give letters of intent. People don't want to come. You know, they get other job offers, things like that. In regards to job fairs specifically, last year we did have 18 specific job fairs that we attended. Of those job fairs, we went to FAMU, UCF, UF, NC and AT&T State, UNC, Nova Southeastern, University of West Florida, FAU, UF, Diversity in Ed, Florida State University. So we do have all those data and those statistics. If we're talking currently for this school year, we've done the IRSC job fair on September 10th. I went to FAMU September 18th. We went to NSU Recruit a Shark Day on September 19th. Edward Waters, October 9th. Bethune-Cookman, we actually have coming up on October 24th. And we have another additional 3 that are scheduled. Sometimes what happens with recruitment and job fairs, the colleges don't have the dates. So we continually reach out to them, when's your date going to be? They know that we're interested. And then I foresee us having another 10 to 15 for probably a total of 20 this year by the end of the school year.
Good. I'm glad that you were able to give us that information. It gives me a better understanding as to how often we're going, and that it's definitely a focus for us.
Yeah.
I just want us to better manage what we do there so that we can use that information to justify that we're moving towards closing out the
Equity.
The gap between our instructional staff and our student population.
no, the oh my God.
Desegregation.
Yes, the
Desegregation.
desegregation
Sure.
order, I just went blank. And in order for us to be able to do that, when we are needing to present to the court, you know, what are you doing? We can't just verbally say, oh yeah, we're going, and sure, we are trying to recruit, you know,
Sure.
minority teachers. Verbal justification isn't going to get us anywhere, but with documents,
Sure, and I can assure you, I've been through the court-ordered plan to ensure that our recruitment plan is aligned with those things, and looking at the data, the evidence synthesis support to ensure that when we do review those things,
Okay,
we'll
I
be.
believe
Thank you.
Dr.
I
Schiff
appreciate it.
and
Thank
then Mrs. Berenborg.
Somewhat along those same lines. Can you say a little bit, when you say we attend these events, what does that mean? Does that mean one person goes? Does that mean 3 people go? Does it mean people from specific units go with particular intentions? We hear sometimes from different departments that different people went to different events, and I'm not sure how those are all aligned together. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, typically we try to have 2 at events. Sometimes that might be more or less, but typically the number is 2. We have a recruitment team that is a diverse team established among district administrators. This upcoming year, we are also looking at some schools that may have a lack of diversity, to have those principals or administrators go to those job fairs to specifically recruit educators for their school specific. So we do have multiple people that do go that are a wider range of administrators across the district, whether that be district administration, school administration. And like I said, we are looking to target schools that are lacking some diversity to ensure that those principals are at those at those events.
And just to follow up, can you clarify that if anybody goes to any event like this from the district, that it's coordinated through your department so that there's coordination, we always know who's going for what purpose?
Yeah, 100%. We have a great staff member, Asha, that that really heads a lot of our efforts. I mean, she's making phone calls, daily, weekly to colleges, knocking on doors. How can we get into your college? And she's been, a proponent of even getting into Edward Waters, which has already turned out to be a success. So she is the point of contact when it comes to recruitment, retention, or anybody that's listening that has an event that's up and coming to contact her, because we'd love to be a part of those things. But she is constantly looking at relationships. She actually went to a staff training that was, I believe, 2 weeks ago, but it was specific to recruitment of minority educators. And she's already brought that back to our staff to do a needs assessment to say, okay, what are we doing? This is what the experts are saying, and how are we comparing to what the top schools are doing? And I feel very confident to say that we are actually going to more recruitment to historically black colleges and universities than large districts are going to. I can speak specifically to Flagler. We didn't have this comprehensive plan, and we had a larger gap in between our instructional staff and our students. And we had 13,000 students versus 17. So there is a budget for these things. The superintendent supports, looking and looking at our range of where else haven't we been to, whether it be out of state or regionally, so that we can continue this recruitment efforts.
And, sorry, you're gonna go into the diversity report also in addition to this,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Great.
Yeah, I was saving my questions till the end, but I guess we're asking them as the slide show up.
Feel free.
Sorry. But since you have this slide, I know these are typically the larger schools, and there are several small schools that have education departments. And I understand that you're reaching out to those schools. So my question is, schools like Florida Southern, Rollins College, places like that, they have excellent education departments. I know my daughter graduated from one of them. But I also know that the recruitment wasn't there. Polk County was getting them. It's great, because that's where they're located. But those students didn't really want to stay in Polk County, all of them. So my question is, how are you reaching out to the schools that don't have job fairs that do have education departments?
I would say that probably is either a point of growth or something we can review with staff to look at those things. But if you have suggestions, I think sometimes when we look at recruitment, these are some of the top 10 that we know have highly qualified educators that come out of them. And I think sometimes it also, where are you gonna get your return on investment, because all these send that. But I think that whether it's flyers or invitations to our job fairs or speaking at events, I think there's things that can be done to help those smaller colleges.
Well, and a follow-up, the reason why I bring that up is because having attended recently UF's graduations and having attended them several years ago, I saw a huge difference in the education department and how many graduates there were. It was shocking how few there were.
I can speak to, what is it called? Not Valencia, but UCF. Their complete department has declined, and so now they're looking at an alternative certification route for people that can't.
And my point being that we need to look in every avenue we can. We shouldn't just poo-poo these small colleges, and we need to at least reach out to them and say, hey, we're here and we're offering. Yeah. Because I think that the pool is small and the requests are huge. And we are competing with 66 other counties looking for the same people. So I think that we need to do our best job we can finding out all the schools that are available, all the different people that are available.
I agree. Well, I think one of the things that stands out to me in terms of Indian River, because people are going to come to an organization sometimes out of college, they look at, what is the salary, starting salary. We're in the top 10 in the state of Florida based on pulling, data from all the other websites, but we're in the top 10. I think we're number 7 right now. So salary, we are above 40,000. I think 24 districts across the state are above 40,000. So salary is one, and we offer a very competitive benefits package. So I think those things are, but getting the word out there, we can look into.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have one last question, because it aligns with this, before we go into the diversity report. Florida Future Educators at our high schools, does it currently exist? If it doesn't exist, do we have plans to try to start that up a bit to encourage young people that are attending school here that might like to return to teach, to kind of fan the flames of their love for education?
That's something we can consider.
I think that's an area that we've had some ideas shared, that's an area of growth for us.
Can I tag on that? Because that's something I brought up in the past. St. Lucie does that. They actually offer students that graduate from their high schools guaranteed employment their first year after college if they graduate with an education degree.
Did you hear that, Mr. Osapian?
Okay? And I think that that's worth doing.
Guaranteeing them a position.
Guaranteeing them a position. If they come back to their county, they automatically have a job.
Yeah,
Now, granted, they have to do their due diligence and you know, do a good job, but they're offered a starting position.
Okay?
All right.
We're gonna
I
move- oh,
I
I'm
have a
so
question. I've been waiting. I've been writing my questions down, but I can ask all my questions at the end, but this one's related to this one, this slide here. You were mentioning about the teams that go out for recruitment. Typically, it's 2 individuals. How are these team members identified and chosen to go out to these certain locations?
Yeah, so within our recruitment plan, and if you don't have a copy of that, I can mail a copy to that, but we do have a team of participants. We also sometimes have teachers that go out to recruitment fairs as well to help with that. I know as a new teacher, I was actually brought back to upstate New York to help recruit from my college and things like that. But we do have a list of about 18 people that are on that. So anybody that wants to be involved in that, and again, what I spoke to is we're also targeting, not necessarily having people volunteer to us, but if we have a school that we need to find diversity at, we're going to reach out to those schools to have them come to it.
Okay.
That was an interesting question. I was curious, and this may be the case or it may not be, and I'm going to ask anyway. When you go to HBCUs, do you traditionally try to bring an African-American teacher from the school, from the district? Is one person at least representative? I'm curious how that works. Because I know if you said, like, Beachland's a school that is not a diverse school, so you may bring that principal, but, you know, how do you, that was a question that I had.
Yeah,
Bethune-Cookman, we're going to on Thursday. One is a teacher in our district, and he.
I'm sorry, just because our viewing audience can't hear. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon. We have a team going to Bethune-Cookman this Thursday. One of them is Dr. Long, and she graduated from Bethune-Cookman, and then Tyron Parks, who is a teacher at Beachland, an excellent music teacher. Dodgertown, that's right, Dodgertown, and he will be going back as well to Bethune-Cookman. So as much as possible, in fact, we've run the list of our teachers, and if we can find someone who has graduated from a school, we try to send them if they'd like to as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move forward.
So this slide, we are focused on diversity. If you can take a look at last year and this year, and that it's not a 5-year trend, but our overall, if you take a look at overall our diversity of instructional staff, we're at a 9.9%. For 1920, it was 12% of our new hires, as well as in 1819, it was 11%. Some of the efforts that I'd spoken to in regards to some of the colleges, the recruitment efforts, who we sent, lend a good hand to that 12% of those new hires. And then part of that school board policy, that annual report on staff diversity, this will be available on the district website. It will be all-inclusive in regards to board docs. I tried to break it down into the different categories, although that full report will have everything together for ease of the public to be able to see those things. But what I wanted to do, if I can bring it up for you. That's okay. So if you take a look at the annual report on staff diversity, what I tried to do was break down all the different, 5-year breakdown by the different races, and give specifically in regards to Hispanic, non-Hispanic, male, female, an overall breakdown to all the staff across the district. In the report that is this separate report, I've tried to give some different graphs, and although you can't see them as well on here, on the actual PDF, you can see those things. But I tried to give just a general breakdown with some graphs in regards to all the different statistics across the districts, as well as all the different PDFs that are attached on board docs, give it broken down by administrative, instructional, CWA, 12-month administrative district, as well as, I think, professional and ProTech. So overall, within that school board policy, you know, just looking at our staff demographics and being able to potentially look at different trends or how each school has been broken up in regards to race and ethnicity.
Why is it Hawaiian and not, that's an interesting break. I'm just curious. I mean, I would imagine like Hispanic or, you know, but we don't have, am I asking a bad question?
No, you're not asking a bad
Okay.
question. I'm trying to be prepared.
Hawaiian, I don't know, we have white, Asian, African American, Hawaiian, Native American, multi-race.
Yeah, I'm interested, why don't we have Hispanic?
Well, actually,
You do, it's a separate
Actually,
line
Not
item.
differently, I'm just curious how Hawaiian was.
It's there, it's just breakout.
see, I have staff to support me.
On the left, Hispanic origin.
So, for the Hispanic is an ethnicity, not a race.
Right.
So it's counted separately because you could be white and Hispanic, black Hispanic, Asian Hispanic. It's an ethnicity. For Hawaiian, what it is in the list of codes, it's Pacific Islander.
That I would have understood more than okay. Yeah.
Well, and if you look at, what I did was I pulled the U.S. Census Bureau, and I can rename this, but it's Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander.
I've seen Pacific Islander before. I have not seen Hawaiian specifically
Yeah.
before, so that was the question.
Yeah, so the U.S. Census Bureau, they break it down by race and ethnicity. So, and when my report was pulled, it probably just made that smaller. But I can correct that one to say Native Hawaiian or other Pacific.
And that's why you see on the charts, we've added the Hispanic origin so that you can see those statistics, even though, you know, it's an ethnicity versus race. So you're seeing both on the charts that Mr. Osipian put in the report. And you have individual, on board docs, you have individual reports by location. So by school, department, those kinds of things. And then, of course, the report actually gives you summary with there. So you can go as micro or as macro as you want to go with the data.
So in closing, some of the things that we are doing within the HR department, standard operating procedures, SOPs. We're taking a look at what I believe in is efficiency, effectiveness, and consistency. So whether those standard operating procedures are among my staff members, but that could trickle down in regards to other administrative or district staff that have HR dealings. We have management investigation manual. What does that look like from the district perspective? What does that look like from a school-based administration perspective to ensure that quality investigations, as well as that they're clear, concise, and inclusive of what is needed. We're also, our recruitment manual is something that is a fluid document. As job fairs go up or different ideas do come up, we will continue to update that. Our diversity recruitment focus, just like Ms. Berenborg had said, you know, small colleges, you know, our offers, one of the conversations we had is looking at and I've had this conversation with Marshawn, was Ms. Green, you know, what incentives can we look at, whether that be from the equity committee or business partners to, you know, maybe it's a reduction of rent, maybe it's a gift card, maybe how can we recruit and look at incentivizing some of those ideas. So that I look at as a collaborative effort also with the community to see what type of business partners we can onboard for some of these things. We're also looking at salary studies. We have a staff member that will be going through professional development and certification in regards to salaries and how those align to current jobs, other jobs, et cetera, moving forward so that there's a clear and concise procedure in place. And then finally, from a recruitment standpoint and an overall standpoint, looking at our HR website to ensure that it is increased in social media as well as it is reflective of all the work that goes on, as well as if there's questions in regards to the vacancies. You know, all of our vacancies are filled by high quality substitutes so that that public has that transparency.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And then Mrs. Justice, Mrs. Berenberg, go.
I just wanted to add on with what Mr. Osipian said. So his first day when he arrived, we had just received the FAS report, and he and I sat down and went through this. He read it cover to cover. The HR department has obviously had a opportunity to go through it, and there are several things in here that are recommendations for us. And so what we tried to do is look at the things that, one, were the highest priority from the administration standpoint. You see that they already have work plans that they're already working on in getting manuals put together, updated. This is dealing, when you talk about management investigation manual, that's from an employee side of the house. One of the things that we may work on is how to do an investigation that has to do with a student investigation that would come on the student services side of the house. So understand that in this particular context, we're talking about employee investigations, but really honing in on those procedures, protocols, and once those items are put together, then we will roll out the implementation of that. How do we communicate that and make that part of the fabric of our work? From the district staff to the school-based staff, meaning principals, assistant principals, department sites, supervisors, managers, directors, all the folks that might supervise or might have a situation where they have to address an employee issue. What is the protocol? Who do you call? How do we know what level it reaches? And then we're all following the same thing. We have a consistent document that we are communicating the process. We will also make sure that you have those available to you as well, and those will be on the website. So while you don't see everything in this report up there, we know that, you know, if you don't roll out 25 goals in a school improvement plan, you roll out 4 or 5 and do those really well, and then you go to the next. So these represent the highest priorities from our perspective, and then we'll continue. I think there were some other things that I just wanted to highlight in this particular document. Like there's one recommendation in here that talks about payroll. And I was a little confused by that because HR really doesn't do payroll. Finance does payroll. There's a whole payroll department, but you see it in here. And when you really look at it, you have to put it in the context of HR, because when an employee is hired, and I'm going to use the superintendent. So when a superintendent is hired and you go through that process, when I went through that process, my salary was set, okay? Or it's set according to the salary schedule the school board has set forth. HR goes in and keys in the salary and the calendar for that employee. That is what they mean when they say HR's role in payroll in here. It's not that they actually process payroll or that they do pay stubs, things like that, but they start the payroll process by keying in, here's Susan Moxley, she's in the interim superintendent position, here is her salary on this particular table, and her start date is this, and her calendar is this. So that's how that works. So again, if you have any questions as you're reading this on context, you have to put it in the HR context.
Well, something, Dr. Moxley, something that what I read in this report with regard to salaries was the recommendation it's on page 16. It was the recommendation that followed the findings for the position of controller, of control specialist, rather. I'll just read the recommendation. As the district implements its modifications of the current staffing formula and process principal input concerning allocations and staffing should continue to be solicited. So I think one of the other things that were in here was that there ought to be better communication between human resources and the financial part of, the financial department, rather, the
Yeah.
finance department. I'm not sure how that fell under the position control specialist, the position of control specialist.
I can speak
And I
to
can
it.
answer
Yeah.
that too, so I'll let you go
But
first.
somewhere along
Because we
there-
have something that's being worked on right now that addresses that one.
Perfect, because somewhere in there, I did note that there needed to be better communication and that this staffing formula and HR must communicate.
Yeah, 100%.
this.
We already have a plan in place. Me and Mr. Fagan are going to be looking at staffing formulas. What does that look like? How do we involve principals within that process? You know, how do we involve position control, you know, members from my department, so that there is that transparency. It's a relationship. You know, these are the amount of dollars, this is the amount of students, here's the amount of positions, so that all stakeholders are involved with the process. They understand how the process was formed, and they understand at the end of the day, this is how your allocations were granted. So we do have a plan in place.
And I'm just going to add on to that, because when I first came, I went, how do we allocate? And I had heard about some things that caused some financial issues in the past. And I said, well, where's our staffing formula? I understood the process, and I think that if from an individual school, they came in, they met, they had a nice meeting with HR, they went through their allocations, and everything flowed for that particular school. So if I'm an individual school principal, I knew, and I sat and I had that one-on-one with HR, and I think that's where the position control came. But if you were outside of that, you've got to have a way where all that meshes together, and there should be a staffing allocation formula that the board knows, that everybody across the district knows, you know, in HR, not just from an HR individual principal, and it's consistent from school to school to school. And we did that we started that conversation when we talked about how are we staffing schools. Is it on classroom by classroom? Is it school size or school average? You know, those kinds of things. We made adjustments. So we started that process when we did that. Now what we're doing, and it's being in a partnership with HR and finance, where we're actually putting together and looking at what does the staffing formula look like. So if I'm in elementary school and I have 300 students, this is what my staffing should look like, both above the line and below the line. And what we mean by that is classroom, student, and then those are support positions, meaning assistant principal, whether it's a guidance counselor, behavior intervention specialist, whatever that might be, clerical staff. So we actually hope to have that project finished up here by the end of December, so that we can bring that, because we want to use that to start the staffing formula come February and March.
Good.
Go ahead.
Whenever we're ready for
I'll
more
wait.
questions.
I have several questions, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
I thought,
Oh, Chief,
It
oh,
was
I'm
me,
sorry.
Mrs. Berenborg.
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So you spoke a little bit about the certification process, certifications. At a recent agenda, consent agenda, we approved an out-of-field report for some of our teachers. And Dr. Moxley and I had discussed it a little bit. I just had a question regarding, you know, we just talked a little bit, how does finance work with HR? How does curriculum and instruction work with HR? And as far as professional development, we have not had a professional development department. And in working with our teachers to make sure that they're getting the certifications that they need and that the schedule is working for them so that everyone is prepared as possible, what is your philosophy with the way that human resources works with curriculum and instruction? Do you want to answer that and then I'll go to the next question, or do you want me to keep going and then you can answer?
Keep on going, and
All right.
try to filter it all
The
through.
next question was substitutes, and you may not be able to answer all of this right now, but my question about substitutes was specifically, how do we target a substitute pool? I think we have an untapped substitute pool, and I'll use, there's a mom that I'm aware of who's been very active in PTA, and she's recently, as her children have gotten older within the school system, gone back into subbing in schools, and I think there's an untapped potential for that, whether it be people that are retired within the community that maybe didn't necessarily teach here, but are retired educators in the community, or who live here now, or parents of students, because the school day ends when their children's school day ends, so it may work for them as an additional income, and then being able to volunteer or give back within the community. So just a thought to that. Job descriptions is my next question. Jobs have changed, and I'll use front desk reception as the biggest one. my question would be, when job descriptions change, be they that the school board or the superintendent feels the job description needs to change, or that state statute dictates that there are some new requirements for a position like a receptionist, how do we plan to handle those types of things? Because that's sensitive, especially with the receptionist. You might have someone in a position for a very long period of time. They're a part of your school family, but they may not be able to fulfill whatever that role is currently if the job description has changed or if state statute has forced the job description to change. And then just the interesting thing about starting teacher salary and the governor's recommendation for starting teacher salary. That's going to be interesting for charter schools. And it's going to be interesting for us too, because that's a starting teacher salary, and there aren't a lot of plans for support or any of those other salaries that we need to tend to as a district. So just what that looks like for you on the horizon as far as it changes recruiting strategies.
All right, so let me start with the first one you asked about my philosophy in regards to working with other departments, curriculum specifically. I believe that a well-functioning organization doesn't function in silos, and that things are fluid, whether that be HR to finance, HR to curriculum, and for example, in regards to out-of-field, the ELL re-endorsement. Well, here's the list of teachers, and as those teachers are brought aware of those things, here's the courses that are being offered. So I think it's that communication and that partnership with all departments to ensure that at the end of the day, our employees are supported so that the students get the best each and every day, and then a teacher doesn't have to worry about, well, I'm going to be non-reappointed because I don't have the certification. So I think we work hand in hand. If issues arise, whether it be myself or staff members, we communicate with those departments. Here's what we need. What can we offer for our staff members? So that's my overall philosophy.
So in your experience, and I'll follow up just on this question, professional development and a professional development department, we do not have that. I have heard that to be an issue at times, and that this isn't to be answered now. That's just something that we have heard has been an issue because we've asked people to do that in addition to their jobs rather than it being something that someone focuses on organizing. And I know it's important for our teachers. So I just wanted to say that, put that out there again.
And I can address that in respect to some of the things that we're doing, because this by no means is all inclusive of everything that we do, but we are looking at some LinkedIn Learning in safe schools in regards to customer service. And some different modules that, and it may address some instructional things as well as non-instructional, but how phone etiquette, email etiquette, those different types of things. So those are all PD, and there's a lot of online courses. So that's one of the things that our department is looking at in regards to some of that professional development.
So I need to add to that because I don't want anybody to think we don't have PD, because in curriculum we do have 3 program specialists that's what they do all the day is professional development. Is it enough? Is it a separate department or a big department? No, but I mean, we have one individual that does all the beginning teacher, new teacher. We have another staff person that does all our in-service points and things like that. So some of it is more compliance.
Okay.
And we need to expand and I think hit on the things you're talking about that you hear.
I was speaking specifically some of the
you're talking about.
stuff that,
So the one other thing about professional development, because I saw that long list of out of field, and particularly with ESOL or ELL, that's something that we've already started talking about in cabinet, because that is a professional development, that is a curricular thing. As our population of students with the Hispanic population seems to be growing and being a higher percentage, the number of teachers that need to have that endorsement, that list is going to get large, and we need to work on that, and that means there needs to be incentives to add that endorsement because it is a 300-hour endorsement, and we need more teachers to have that, and not just get a course here or a course there, but actually complete the full 300 and put it on. We offer the training for free for teachers, but again, to get the full 300 endorsement is what ends up meeting the out-of-field requirement with that. As far as job descriptions, that's one of those standard operating procedures and protocols because, and it's not, as a district our size, that's not uncommon where it's just kind of like as a need comes up, but what happens is you don't have consistency and you need to have fairness and equity and consistency, and so that's one of the areas where we're really looking at a protocol and a process. Mr. Hosipian and Mr. Fagan and I have actually had a meeting last week about it because we have a number of areas that we have questions about where when I've been out and about and talking with employees, it's like, gee, I'm not sure that allocation and how does that fit with this job description? And when we have two tasks and assignments that come together into one, how's that job description work? We have a list of those items.
Okay, and then subs, have you thought about recruiting?
No, but just, I'm always thinking, and I think that I've been on the radio show already once, but I think, the radio show could be a great way to advertise the need for substitutes, same schedule as your students, and if you're interested, contact X, Y, and Z. So we do look at fill rates and things like that. 280 subs for the size of this district is a good number, but the more that we can get, because there is turnover with subs too, and how we can help streamline that process for them. But I'll bring that back to staff. Thank you. And then the
Governor
final
Sally.
one, charter schools. I don't like to make comments in regards to any type of change in legislation because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. But because you're asking, I think that any type of change in regards to substantial increase in any district, whether it be charter or non-charter school, with regard to salary, is going to take, you only have so many pieces of the pie, and it's going to come out of somewhere. There's talks in regards of, is this coming out of best and brightest money, and is legislation going to change for that to go away? Because this year with legislation, best and brightest was now a line item versus from DOE. So I would.
You talked about us being high as far as districts in the state, but as far as a national level of teacher salary, we're not.
No, we're high in the state, and if everybody's on a level playing field, at 47,000, whatever that number might be, I think districts that don't necessarily pay as much, some are paying $32,000, $33,000, their operating budgets are going to be significantly impacted. So we'll see what happens, but we have an amazing CFO at our hands, so if changes do happen, he's going to have a plan. But I would say this: any changes that do happen, us in finance will work hand in hand in regards to the impact, and you will be notified of what that impact could look like.
Okay. Mrs. Barrenborn?
First of all, thank you to you and most of your staff for being here today. I know now is the time where you can finally breathe. People think about, summer, they're not doing much in the schools. You guys are doing a lot. And I know that you just finished with all the onboarding, so I appreciate that hard work. You made a comment in the very beginning about stay surveys, and you said that they started in, 2007, which is interesting. I think I left the district in 2006. So I had...
17, I'm sorry, 2017.
Okay,
If
all
I
right,
said 7,
17.
I apologize.
All right, I wrote down 7. Good, I'm glad we're doing that, because I actually had an exit survey with the superintendent, and she actually pulled me into her office and we talked. But I'm glad to see that we're actually writing that down and we're collecting that information. And again, with that information is important, as well as climate surveys that we look at. And last year when we were looking at that, it was very telling to me. Kind of some patterns that were going on. So I'm glad that this is all being addressed. I'm glad that FAD's report kind of reflected the same thing that I saw in some of the surveys. But I'm curious as to what percentage of the surveys are returned.
Off the top of my head, right now, currently, the state surveys for this last rollout in September, I think we're at 50%.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was just rolled out. And again, those things will continue. Our exit surveys, I think, was around 67, 70%, high 60s. And if a applicant does not choose to do the online survey, they do get a phone call. And we can't force anybody to do that, but it's not just, do the online survey. They do get a follow-up phone call to try to get that information, that data, because I do agree with you that information is important.
Right, and one of the things that was kind of glaring in the surveys that I saw was the opportunity for advancement. That came up several times. And I haven't seen it in here. I'm not sure if that's kind of goes to a different department now. And looking at opportunities, if I'm a teacher and I want to go into administration, what are the steps and what kind of preparation do I need? Is that now leave your department and go somewhere else, or is that under the umbrella of the HR department?
That's a two-department kind of scenario, and we've had conversations of starting because we need a leadership or aspiring new leaders kind of program here. We do not currently have that. And I'm actually gathering some information from other districts that already have it. so that we're not totally starting over from the beginning. We have used some professional development that we did for administrators in the years past that helped certify newly hired principals, but across the board, we do not have a pool process or a leadership development that is desperately needed, in my opinion, and that would be something that I've talked with Dr. Lord a little bit about that as coming in as executive director of secondary. I've talked, because she has some background in that from a previous career assignment. I've talked with Mr. Osipian from that, and I've talked with Pam Dampier about that. So to me, I think it's a cross-development between curriculum and HR, because curriculum has the PD pieces in it. So
I look forward to that plan being presented. I'm glad you brought up Management Investigation Manual. That was in the FAS report, as you were bringing up, and I know that that was one of your top 5 that you're going to address, so I appreciate that that's one of your top 5. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Also, I wrote down ESOL courses, and you addressed that as well. And they're available online. But seeing that we have so many of our teachers out of field in ESOL, how are we putting that out there or advertising that so that if it's free and it's online, and how are we promoting that so that we don't have this long list?
I don't know the exact answer to that because I've been dealing with the conceptual issue, and I haven't gotten down to that granular conversation of, have we done flyers? Is it when the supervisor, meaning i.e. principal, has issued the you're out of field, they have to take so many hours to be considered in field for the next year? I mean, how is that being communicated to the employee? I'm sorry, I don't know that answer right now today, but that we will put that on the list to answer. I just don't know that. I've been looking at it from a
I know as a
higher
principal,
level
I
than
had
that.
to go through that list with
Absolutely.
the teacher by teacher and just say, I see
Absolutely.
that you're out of field in ESOL. Here are some opportunities, what fits in your schedule type thing. So I'm just curious if we're doing that. And then my last issue is about high needs areas and stipends. I don't know if you were in the room when I mentioned that I actually got employed the first year I ever taught because I was in a high needs area, high needs school, and a high needs area of science. Because in Houston, they needed science teachers badly, and they needed them especially at Title I schools. So when you have areas like that, and being the board and looking at the budget, that's something that we're saying, how can we get the best and the brightest in our schools to teach our kids? And if minority recruitment is one of our high needs, is that allowable?
Anything in regards to wages, salaries would have to go through collective bargaining. But to speak to some of the high needs areas, the best and brightest statute did define high needs in regards to certain areas. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I believe there was some science, math, I'm not 100% sure. Computer science, social studies, yeah. So that does address that, but anything above and beyond that would have to be done through collective bargaining. But we already have some dates that are being scheduled for beginning of November, so we're looking forward to that process and establishing that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the last time that I took a look at the teacher handbook is primarily geared toward IRCEA members. When I was looking through it, it dawned on me that we have many teachers who are not IRCEA. Is there a way to identify either within, now I don't know if you're going to consider this part of the standard operating procedures, the teacher manual, the teacher handbook, but if that is the case, it would be nice to see either 2 different handbooks, one for the person who is not a union member, and then one for the person who is a union member. I don't know how you would take a look at that, but I've had some teachers who were not union members say, does this manual,
So I think from a district, if we have a teacher manual, and we haven't talked about this, but to answer your question from my perspective as superintendent, a teacher is a teacher is a teacher. Now, if they choose to be a member of IRCEA, that's fine, that's great. And the contract then is part of that collective bargaining piece, but the contract also is the teacher contract. So that contract applies to me even if I'm not an IRCE member. So I'd really want to go back and look at that handbook
Yeah.
from the view that you just mentioned, because from a district standpoint, if the district has produced a teacher handbook, that would be for all teachers.
That's exactly
in our
my,
district.
that's my view exactly.
Is there an example of
But
something
when,
that's written?
oh, I don't have, I can certainly pull it up as soon as I can. I can never get
I'm just
internet here.
curious.
Yeah, I'll look. There are certain examples in there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But even if we were to take the teacher handbook and make mention somewhere at the beginning or somewhere along the lines that say, irregardless of whether you are IRCEA or not, but there are specific examples, mentions in there
Take a look
that
at
talk
that.
about, something to the bargaining unit, I don't know what it is.
Well, there
I
may
gotta
be
look it up
something
before I
about
misquote.
how mail is delivered, I don't know, but,
There's also mention in there for investigations and things like that. So I just want to make sure that we are even, with everybody, treating everyone equally. I have a few other questions, Dr. Schiff, if you don't mind. So I just wanted to mention that with regard to the teacher handbook. I'd also like to remind, I don't know, Mr. Recipient, if you know that in the spring, board members requested that exit interviews, the results of exit interviews be given to us, I believe we said quarterly.
Correct.
So we are just about approaching our next quarterly submission, but I'd also love to see the stay interviews that were just sent out. I don't know when that's ending, but when that ends, I'd love to see that as well. Since we are using stay interviews to drive the our decision-making abilities, I've been thinking about how to say this, and oftentimes I am told I have to think about my words before I say them, because they might seem a little curt, but with all due respect to your amazing department, the climate and culture in the district has always been an issue. But frankly speaking, from people who have contacted me, and I contacted you recently with regard to a stay interview concern from an employee who said, I'm afraid to complete this stay interview because I'm afraid of retribution. And that is and not retribution specifically from their supervisor, retribution from human resources standpoint. And again, with all due respect to the hardworking people in your department, the climate and culture of the gotcha mentality of human resources, it has to change. And I know that we're working on that. And it may not even be there, but if it's perceived for those who are needing to go to human resources, then it's there. Whether real or not, perception is someone's reality. And they need to feel comforted when they go to human resources. In my opinion, human resources is the resource for our employees. And so I would like for us to honor confidentiality in that sense and to move forward also to ensure that we are not going to conduct ourselves in that kind of manner for our employees. Otherwise, what's the point?
To Mrs. Rosario's point, it's interesting. Dr. Moxley and I have spoken before about a civility policy. I think it works both ways. I think that employees must respect district staff must respect employees should respect school board members, and school board members should respect and support district staff. So if there's anything we could do, Dr. Moxley, before your exit from this district, along the lines of a civility policy of some sort, I think that might be good. I don't know that any board member would disagree with that type of a civility policy.
I'd like to continue. An administrator agrees if there were, and this actually would talk to the management investigation manual, I suppose. If an employee is under investigation for whatever purposes, or they're being called in for disciplinary issues or a possible disciplinary issue, if an administrator at that point chooses to take out a particular phrase or word or edit what was initially, like, you're investigating someone, you call them in for a meeting, you call them in for A, and it turns out it's really not A, it's B, so let's go ahead and change the wording in what we have written already. When that edit happens, I'd like to make sure that we're honoring what has been changed. I don't want time to go by where we are then telling, again, it goes back to this kind of gotcha mentality, that we're then telling an employee, sorry, your time is up. When really it's not the employee's fault, it might actually just be that we didn't follow up with the administrator, or the administrator didn't follow up with human resources in terms of ensuring that this change is in the file. I'm not sure, but I want to make sure that that we're honoring what we say when we're engaging in these types of concerns with our employees, with investigations and so forth, and file policy, what goes in a file are not miscellaneous. Emails do not go in a file. I mean, unless it is attached to an investigation, those types of things really ought to be,
And I think that all goes back to the standard operating procedures.
it does, and I would love to, it does, thank you, and I would love to ask my next question, which is, when do you suppose these might be expected to be completed? The management manual and the SOP?
We're looking to have some things done some drafts done between November, but hopefully we have a pretty good product by December. But December is really my goal, and again, like Dr. Moxley spoke to, there's vetting, there's feedback, there's, cabinet, there's principals, there's directors. So we want to make sure that if we do have a product, it's a high-quality product, it's a well-thought-out product, and we're able to go through it. So I don't try to do anything haphazardly. Something's going to come out from or none of my department try to do anything. We want a quality product for anything that we do. I'd like to say December, we should have a high-quality product. However, if we need to make revisions, get, stakeholder input and things like that, it might be a little bit longer than that, but hopefully by December, we should have some things in line, at least a good start, so that there is some consistency.
So my last question is, maybe it's just a clarification, I wanted to make sure that I heard you originally at the very beginning of the presentation, which was when these are completed, there is going to be a rollout with principals so that they are trained, and assistant principals as well?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
anybody that's involved in doing any type of investigation should be trained, especially in regards to employees, confidentiality, sensitivity, facts, all things are all inclusive. So, my goal is when this is rolled out, it may be rolled out at a principal meeting, as well as individual conversations with administrative teams as to what this looks like, and then an open dialogue as to questions. The HR department's here for even investigations. Currently anything they need, they pick up the phone, they call, whether it's myself, Edwina or Michelle, we're there to help support them through any of that, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, it's fair, equitable, as well as consistent on any investigation we do.
Thank you.
Do you have a question?
I have a couple, I'll be brief. I'll state them directly. On the exit survey that you mentioned,
Yes, ma'am.
we've gotten those in the past, and they're quite hard to read in the format that we get them. What I'd like to request is that there be some analysis of that by the time we get it, that you guys look it over, you analyze it, and you give us some information other than individual reports, if that would be possible. It would be much easier. I'd like to see the raw data, but I would also like to see your analysis of the information you're getting rather than just these raw pieces of paper.
Is that done in some other capacity that could be shared with us? Do you know what I mean? I mean, some compilation of the results must be being done in some way.
We'll look at, how that is gathered and we get the raw data, whether the program that we use, whether it can compile it, or if we have to do it by hand. We will need to check. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer
But I
to that.
understand what you're saying, because I know you have to go through every single one, when in essence you'd like to know 50% of the exit surveys said this.
And not only do I want the aggregate data, but I want some information from you guys in how you are looking at and analyzing what this tells you. What does this tell us so that we can use it moving forward? And it's not just kind of a bunch of data that says, 50% of people are happy or unhappy with this. Well, what does that mean? What does that tell us moving forward? How does that help improve your unit, our district, based on the information we're getting from people who are leaving or staying or whatever that piece of information is? Secondly, you mentioned the leadership program. Sorry, I got hair in my mouth. And I don't know where you are in that, but I'm hoping that you'll have, my question is really for you, but in conjunction, if you will have at least a skeleton, but hopefully more than a skeleton in place before you go. Because I know that this is an initiative that you identified and started working on when you got here. And it's something that I would hate to see drop off in the onboard, in a new superintendent coming on who has so much to deal with. You've already spent those number of months, and I'm hoping that there will be something in place for that.
I am working really hard at that. I will tell you that I had hoped to have had more than a skeleton in August. Just didn't get there, in all honesty. So I continue to whittle away with it. I know that Mr. Osipian's here now. I did want him to focus on these items. I continue to work on it, and I will do my best to have something before I leave.
Right, and to clarify, I don't mean that as a criticism, because I know
no,
you're busy.
I didn't take it. No, I didn't
what I
take
mean
it.
is that I think it.
But I'm upfront about where I am.
Yeah, you having highlighted it. It's such an incredibly important thing
It's
that we
needed.
don't have, and it needs to be in place, and it needs, the more that happens before we have a new superintendent, the better that person is set up to succeed with one less piece on their plate. The standing operating, the SOPs that you talked about, and you may have said this and I may have missed it. When you create those, are you getting stakeholder input from people around the district who have had experience, to Mrs. Rosario's point, who have had experience in working positively or negatively with human resources, so that their input in how those things get created and how it works for them will be included and taken into account as you develop those?
Yeah, I think it's part of the process, because we have internal SOPs for, how we onboard our employees. Is it working, is it not working? We have things for our certification processes. So I think within all of those, if we can get feedback from certain stakeholders, that could be appropriate. I think also looking at our own staff, because it could be an SOP for how we interact with each other on certain items. So ensuring that we have the most efficient, effective ways. But it's a point well taken.
Well, and again, although I'm sure you already understand this, having an SOP that works for your department doesn't necessarily mean that it works equally well for the people who are recipients of that policy. So I'd like to make sure that anything that we do, even in you mentioned onboarding, what works great and enables your department to work smoothly may or may not be the smoothest thing for a person going through that process.
Sure.
And the only way we know that is by asking them. Lastly, to Mrs. Justice's point about civility, I don't disagree with you, but I would want to be really careful that what we couch as civility isn't necessarily silencing voices. And I want to be really careful how we interpret things like that, because sometimes what is interpreted by one person to be civility means another person doesn't get to voice their real concerns. So I want to just make sure that we're very cautious about how we move forward on something like
I'm glad
that.
you brought that up. There's actually, Pasco County Schools has a respect and civility statement. And just to give an example, one of the things is district staff will not conduct business with those who use obscenities or otherwise speak in a demanding, loud, insulting, or threatening manner. I'm going to share this with Dr. Moxley, and she can share it. I will bring this forward as a policy, as a resolution, we can all sign it. But the level of discourse that we have sometimes between the public and staff, or staff to staff, or staff with school board members, and perhaps vice versa, is not always where I think we are not always leading by example. So this is something, and I hold myself, I will bubble everyone in. I will share this with you. But this is something that Pasco County Schools has, and many other districts.
Dr. Schiff.
That's all I got. Thank you for
Okay.
now.
And then you had one more question?
Yeah, just
Okay.
one more. interest of transparency, I'm trying to find the student, or the teacher handbook that she mentioned, and I looked quickly on the website, and it's not readily available. So my question is, will the manual, the SOP, the teacher handbook, things like that, could we start putting those on there? I think that would help us in the interest of
I haven't
lots
seen
of
the teacher
requests for
handbook,
records.
so,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so I have a few questions. I'm going to go in order that I jotted them down as you were going through your presentation. So like on slide 4, you mentioned human resources, what we do, and you had employee and labor relations. So my question is, because culture and climate is part of our strategic plan, it's really something that needs help right now. What are your plans and thoughts on how we're going to build that trust going forward? Do you have anything that you could share with us today?
I can only speak from experience, and trust takes time. Trust takes vulnerability. Trust takes communication. We were dealing with certain issues, and you pick up the phone call and you call whatever parties that may be to say, here's the situation we're dealing with. This is my thoughts. You get the buy-in, because I think the more transparent that you are with either unit, the more that they're going to say that our department, our district is going to hold strong on things that they say, and they're going to be consistent with those things. I think sometimes that trust is broken down when you say one thing and do another. So my goal with any type of labor relations is, this is who I am, this is who I'm always going to be, and I'm going to be clear and consistent, and I'm going to tell you the facts, and whether they're right, wrong, and different, this is what the facts are. But this is what we can do. Because I also believe that you need to be supportive in those different types of situations, especially when it come to sensitive employee issues or whatever it might be. So always looking at the end result and how we can either compromise or come to some type of consensus is, this is the best, take the labor relations out of it, this is what's best for our students. And we need your support on this, and I think that relationship goes both ways.
Okay, because I was looking in this, the FADS report, and on page 7, it did say the survey results provided an opportunity for the HR department to look closely at their roles in today's competitive educational environment, and then it goes on trusting relationships nurtured and a measurable goal plan of operations developed. I know that, I'm jumping around here, I know that you've identified several opportunities, but of that, in that, where are we going to address the employee labor relations and being able to incorporate that into building and getting that trust back that we want?
Yeah, I would say that, embedded in all this, those are future opportunities, those are future priorities, but embedded, through any business that we do, that is a priority that's always embedded. Because we have ongoing, day-to-day, week-to-week relationships with them. So that's always going to be on the forefront. That's always going to be priority, because any type of, future conversation will always go back to the last conversation that you had. So that's always going to be on the forefront. That will always be a priority. And, not that that's not necessary to put up there, I think.
Well, just from my point of view, I would like to see, I appreciate your reply, but I agree, we need to take that and apply it to all those opportunities you've listed there. And I think by just putting out a standard operating procedures, that you treat this employee the same that you treat this employee, that you treat this employer administrator, and that consistency, like you said, will help build the trust. And I can see where each level up there, by improving that, it also will help improve the trust, which goes back to culture and climate, which goes back to our strategic plan. So to me, that's really important. Page 8 really stood out to me on this report. And moving on to slide 5, exit surveys and stay surveys. In the past, we did not consistently, as a board, get these surveys, so I appreciate making sure that we do get these every quarter and us not have to remind
Sure.
staff that we need it. I would appreciate that. In addition, in the past, I had asked who gets these surveys, because to me it's important that our principals and our principal supervisors also get these surveys so that they can help identify and work with each other. You know, if you keep seeing with one principal the same things coming up in these exit surveys, I think that needs to be addressed through the principal supervisor. But then again, you know, on the opposite side, stay surveys, if you keep seeing these positive things that principals are doing, that principal supervisor needs to be able to identify that and, you know, recognize, continue doing this. It's working, and maybe that's something that we could share with other principals in the district. So my question is, on these exit surveys and stay surveys, who are you going to distribute these to?
So to answer your first question, you will get copies of these.
Okay.
And just so I can clarify some of the dates so everybody has them, you know, the exit surveys were truly started in November of 17, even though we started the program going through the process of May. And then the stay surveys didn't start until spring of 2018. What my understanding, again, I don't have full comprehensive understanding, but I do have the understanding that if there was a concern in regards to some of the surveys and with the exit surveys, the principals were made aware of those types of concerns. If an employee wanted to leave either a comment or wanted personal contact, that would have been done through my staff to follow up with them. And if it was an extensive legitimate concern, that would have filtered up through the chain. In regards, I do not know how often, but I think as a point of clarity, this is something that we can utilize with principals to give them the total results.
I can add to that because I've only been here for one, which was just done right when I first came. And we made sure all assistants, the three assistant superintendents that we had at the time, and Mr. Ossipian wasn't here, and then the principal supervisors got the round that I saw. As those were coming in, before we got the quarterly printout of them, if there was one that reached a level of major concern, that got pulled individually and sent to the superintendent and to the principal supervisor of that school. So I've had one or two that have come in outside of in between the quarterly reports, and we dealt with those individually. So this next round, and I've not seen stay surveys yet, this will be my first round of the stay surveys, but when these come in, our schedule is for 4 assistant superintendents, and then the additional principal supervisors would get them and then work with the principals of those schools.
So that going forward, because I think that's a good practice, and it was something that this board had to push to make happen, how can we put that into, you know, procedures, or that when these come out, because let's say 5 years from now you get this great job opportunity and you move on, you know, that's something that we don't want to have to go backwards on, and it's written, it's an expectation, and it is going forward. Where would you put that?
I think within an HR manual handbook,
Okay.
it would touch on stay exit surveys.
Okay. And then I know we touched on slide 7, district overall retention, 10%. And I do agree that, you know, 90%, when you look at overall, that's good. But then when I look at 90%, I'm thinking 10% is, about 210 employees, and 210 employees times X amount to recruit. That's a lot of money that this district is losing. And I just think when we're looking at where to be a little bit more efficient so that we could put those dollars back into the classroom, I think this is a huge opportunity. So that's something that I do pay attention to. And then lastly, I wanted to make a comment on recruiting. I know that typically, we don't really stress the Hispanic recruiting, and I didn't see that up there on our slide when we go out to recruit. And that does concern me because I know we have about 26%, 27% of our students are Hispanic or from Hispanic families, and about, if I remember correctly, about 6% of our teachers are Hispanic. If we are having trouble, well, first of all, I'm not even seeing where we're trying to recruit Hispanic. I see that we're trying to recruit African American, but also a part of that, I would like to see us try to do a little bit better job on going after the Hispanic students. And if that is not successful, I look at, whenever I was in Atlanta, I looked at some of the companies that offered bonuses or stipends if you were, say, for like UPS, fluent in Spanish. Is that something, and I've brought this up before, part of a stipend when you're hired, if you're fluent in Spanish, you get a bonus when you're first hired to help, because I think a lot of times when, especially from my point of view, my husband and we had several Hispanic foster students, and it was very sad to hear when we would go in for the parent-teacher conference that the parents didn't come because they only spoke Spanish and the teacher didn't speak Spanish. And this, this was several years ago, and it's improved since then. But just to have a teacher, even if the teacher isn't from a Hispanic background, but to be able to speak fluent Spanish with that parent, I think it's so important right now.
So when we talked about legislative platform, that's an area where we specifically could identify that as a critical need. And we could ask for funding for critical need, for that being our critical need, and we can show evidence of why, what
the stipend?
You could, are you going to get it? I don't know, but it certainly is something that I think it's worthwhile for us, for Nancy to put on the ever-growing legislative platform list.
So anyways, that's an area that I'm passionate about us trying to improve, not only with our African American teachers, but also the teachers from a Hispanic background, or even at least minimum of fluent in Spanish. And that's my last. And I appreciate this presentation. Thank you for being here. Mrs. Rosario, and then we...
I was able to find online the teacher evaluation procedures.
Oh, the TEP. Okay.
That's the tab. That's not the that's
No,
not the handbook.
no. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I was mentioning before in terms of if it's for all teachers, then it should be for all, right? So in this one, the Teacher Evaluation Procedures Manual, on page 8, I know you don't, let me just clarify first. What is an MBU? Is that a member bargaining unit? Okay. So if we were to go to page 8, and I know you're not there, but I'm just going to read that. On page 8, there's a chart on the observation and evaluation timeline. And the first bullet says additional observations beyond the quantity specified above may be initiated by the MBU or the evaluator. But not everybody is part of the bargaining unit.
It doesn't
So
matter.
how does,
Right.
Collective bargaining represents everybody,
All the
whether or not they're a
teachers.
part of the
The
union.
job
They
classification.
make
Okay. I
the
just
contract that
wanna-
affects everybody.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, within that manual is actually part of the contract. So it is, anything that is done in that manual is collectively bargained. I do know that a lot of work has gone in, and that we're already starting to schedule some dates to look at that for some revised changes up and coming.
So if you think about it, PERC identifies the positions that are part of a bargaining unit. So, for example, an administrator is not part of a bargaining unit, but a teacher position is. Whether an individual teacher chooses to be a member of the union or not, a teacher position is a classified position to be a NBU.
MBU.
Okay, whether you're a member or not is a personal choice.
They do.
Gotcha.
And
So,
and you're still
yes.
subject to the contract that's negotiated through the collective bargaining unit, whether
God
or
bless
not
you.
you were a
Yeah.
part of the
So
union.
the TEP
Right. I
manual
got-
is for
I understand.
everybody, all
I
teachers,
understand.
contract for all teachers.
Okay, I understand that now.
Okay, I think we are done with this particular topic.
We don't typically have public input at this time, questions, but you're more than welcome to ask staff after this. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll transition from the HR presentation now. And the second item on our agenda is the attendance update.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask for a break if we could, a short break in between.
And can I clarify, we're not going to go over the diversity and equity report as part of this, which I thought we were going to do too, but we're not?
He basically walked you through the data, but we did not go through it line by line.
Oh. 'Cause I did have some thoughts and comments about that. I thought we were going to, I knew
However
we
you
were running
wanna
late, but I
handle
thought
that.
we were going to,
I know we've went over our time, but I know that is part of,
I'll be really brief with a couple things that I just want to draw attention to in this are that, well, I understand and you clarified why the Hispanic origin is out of it. It's hard to read this way and is difficult to make comparisons. And I appreciate all of the ways in which you broke it out, because a lot of my questions from earlier charts were answered by more specific later charts. But what I do want to make really clear, kind of for the record, is that while in the overall chart of total staff, the percentage, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the percentage of total staff is 82% white, a little under 18% African American, and on. I want to be clear that when we get to instructional staff, that varies. And when we get to instructional staff, it's 90% white and 10% African American and various other groups. And I want us to be particularly attentive to that as we move forward in our diversity recruiting and in all of our other policies, that when we lump this together, we miss some of the nuances. And I appreciate you did break some of that down. But we already talked about some of the issues around the Hispanic, and I appreciate Mrs. Zorick in ways that you're thinking through addressing some of that. But I want to be really clear here that for anybody looking at these charts, that even though it seems to suggest that the percentage of African American staff is proportionate to representation of students in the district, it's actually not when you break it down in particular roles. And when you break it down into instructional staff, when you look at, for example, transportation staff, right? So transportation staff brings up the average of particularly African American, but let's broadly say people of color, or minority representation, and that distorts a bit of the look of what we're doing. And I want us to be really transparent about that and how we're doing it. Some of these charts are hard to read, but as we move forward addressing our diversity and equity issues, that we be really clear in our charts and in our. We spoke about recruitment, but that we are wanting this to be not only proportionate to the district, but frankly better than that, and that when we talk about recruiting teachers of color, that we're not talking about that specifically for schools where there are a large minority of students of colors. It is equally important for white kids at Beachland to have African American students as it is for African American students at Dodgertown to have white teachers, and how we spread all of that out. So I realize it's a bit of a soapbox, but I want to make sure that we get that in and as we move forward with greater attention to these issues.
thank you.
All right, let's take 10 minutes, and then they can get set up, and we'll be back. 252.
Yes, board members, this is the attendance update that we wanted to provide for you. Our staff is all in place, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Parandozzi, and if you would introduce the staff so that we can make sure everybody knows everybody.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Moxley, Ms. Diagresta, our guest, and viewing public. This afternoon we have the Division of ESE and Student Services, and this is the Student Services team that works on attendance. To my right is Dr. Christina Jacobs, Lavon Walker, Donna Hedgecock, and Eric Seymour. They'll introduce themselves again as each of them introduces their piece of the presentation. So today, I'm just going to jump right in. Today we have Project Engage, and Project Engage is all about attendance. We wanted to give you some updated information on attendance, and we're going to speak to the what and why. Our division has worked on high-quality programs, effective communication, and continuous improvement. Those are our focus areas for our entire division. And it's a framework embedded in compliance, and that's what we are all about and working on this year since I joined this team. This group is working on, so they took that work and they brought it into attendance. So today you're going to hear about the why, the role of the specialist sitting at this table, a little review of 1819, and the strategic planning piece. Go ahead, just go ahead and click it all. 3 areas that identified that make this program what it is was early identification, building that infrastructure, identifying attendance, the frameworks, supporting pieces of prevention into the attendance arena, the connection, building a connection or making a connection, all about the relationships with students, families, and supporting school attendance, and then that engagement piece. That engaging and making student engagement something that at the school arena, so we want to build that for all of our students. This particular slide is really informational pieces, all of the Florida statutes, board policies that we work off of, implementing, that will be part of our manual for our schools and for us, that our team follows. Go ahead. Thanks. So we know that student attendance is critical, and it drives student success, and these are all of the areas in which, of course, it impacts that we are well aware of, and then all the unintended outcomes that student attendance brings to us when we look at the whole child. But exposure to language, time on task, these are all impacted. On track for student success, college and career ready, and then again we keep talking about that student engagement piece. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jacobs, and she's going to go into the year 1 implementation that we're working on today.
So just to provide you some brief background on how we got here, an important part of our work in the Student Services Office is to engage in reflective practice on the different component areas that we support as a district department. And so what we did is we got together as an attendance team, and we reflected on the practices of attendance and the procedures that have been in existence since before we started working together as a team. And based upon that reflection, we identified areas and barriers that were getting in the way of improvements in the area of attendance, and also different processes and procedures that needed some revision or refinement. In addition to that, we still had some existing questions related to attendance and how we would go about engaging in that work, and those areas were identified as well for areas of improvement in our strategic plan. As you can see, there's really 3 overarching areas. That identification that Dr. Parandozzi talked about, which really consist on ongoing monitoring of our data, so our attendance data, as well as the practices in which we engage in to support students in attending at school. The next part is really about connection, and we know how incredibly important relationships and the development of relationships are for students, not only for attendance, but for other things like behavior, discipline, academic success. And so that is a key component, and we really want to focus in on personalized connections with students in order to re-engage them in the schooling process. And finally, that final component is really integration of attendance into our multi-tiered system of supports. So there's different tiers of supports that in order for us to optimize outcomes for attendance that we provide and we place into our infrastructure within schools. So those tier 1 supports that we provide for all students in order to prevent attendance patterns of non-attendance to occur. those tier 2 supports for kids that we identify as at risk or off track, and then those tier 3 supports that are really more individualized for more complex types of attendance concerns. And so you'll see that we will further explain some of the different components of our strategic plan for the upcoming year. Now, as far as the attendance team, just to give you an idea of how we are organized, as Dr. Parendozzi shared, we're really focused in on ensuring that we are complying with Florida statute as well as school policy in collaboration or in conjunction with establishing those relationships and supports that we know to be so incredibly important to attendance. So as you can see at the top, we have the policies, procedures. The infrastructure was what we've really been working on during the last month or so, is building in those supports for schools so that they can comply with the procedures and policies that are there, as well as the identification of specific supports. We have myself, the coordinator of student services, as well as our 3 attendance specialists that help to work to provide district level supports. But an important part, and probably one of the most important parts of our attendance team across the district, are our district schools and school teams. Because when we talk about re-engaging students into school, they really, the first line of offense for them are their schools, their school administrators, their school teachers. Those are the people that students need to have to want them there at school. And so we really focus in on what school level actions are we engaging in before bringing in our district level team, so that those people that know the students best are those who are working to re-engage the students. And finally, our students and parents are an important part and component of our overall plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about how they are a partner in the process. Here's just an overview of the role of the attendance specialist. Now, this is an exhaustive list of the different roles, but what you can see is down at the bottom in the green space of our triangle that is often associated with MTSS, we have those supports that are more global and district-wide. So the Department of Motor Vehicles, the liaison there, that really talks about those students who are habitually truant and the types of actions that are taken whenever students are habitually truant and of driving age. And then you can see up through the tiers, we have different things that our attendance specialists engage in at Tier 2 and Tier 3. As you go up through, as we see more significant concerns related to patterns of non-attendance occur, we provide more intensive levels of support. And you'll see our most intensive levels of support are at the top of the triangle, and they might include things like home visits and truancy court. In the middle, you see that our attendance specialists are constantly engaging in data analysis, whether that be at Tier 1, looking at their schools and identifying what average daily attendance is, or looking at individual student level and those students who are demonstrating patterns of non-attendance. And also you can see that one of the big things, and we've all been working together, is the use of our focus information system to be able to track that data and make the process more efficient for our schools as well as our district attendance team. So this just gives you an example of one of the pieces of infrastructure and resource supports that we have started work on to make improvements in the way we support attendance around the district. This is essentially an attendance procedures flow chart for referral to our district attendance team. When we engaged and reflect and regroup together, one of the things that we identified was that schools needed some clarification on what the actual procedures were for referral to the district attendance team. You know, we talk about ensuring that we have equitable and consistent practices across the district for all our students in all our schools, and this was one means of increasing the consistency of the way in which we provide supports to the different schools. It also shows an emphasis on school-level actions in re-engaging students prior to engaging our district-level support into the attendance process. And just some information on tiered interventions. Now, by no means, just like our other example, is this an exhausted list of our tiered interventions, but it shows you some of the examples of that work that can be done at Tiers 1, 2, or Tier 3. Some of the things that I would like to point out is really in Tier 1, focusing on those positive relationships. And as we look across the work for student services, we're really working towards an integrated model of student services. What we know is there's a number of strategies that can be applied at Tier 1 school-wide that support, again, attendance, behavior, discipline, academic achievement, all of those different aspects of student development. And so we want to be very cognizant of how we're integrating all of these, because it's not that we're doing more and more things, it's that we're doing more of the right things in order to support all of the different student outcomes that we are looking to realize. Also at Tier 2, these are really strategies focused in on common barriers that students have to attendance, and then just common strategies that we know work for those common barriers. So one example that I'd like to point out is restorative reentries. And so students, for example, that have been out of school for out-of-school suspension, we know are at higher risk for patterns of non-attendance. So LaVon Walker has been working at our elementary level in focus schools on restorative reentries for these students so that we can identify students who are possibly at risk and intervene prior to the development of a pattern of non-attendance. And finally, you can see at Tier 3, we really get, just like in the areas of academic or behavior, more individualized for those students who may have more complex problems or barriers that are preventing them from attending school. So just 2018 and 2019 in review, this provides an overview of the average daily attendance rates of our different schools, and you can see there's quite a range there. We range from about 62% average daily attendance rate all the way up to about 96%. What I can tell you at looking at the data this year, we are running pretty close as far as the range goes. Our overall average daily attendance rate currently is about 1.5 points behind last year. Part of the impact is because of the August 30th hurricane. We had a lot of students go out of school that day unanticipated, and when we look through the data, that impacted it. The good news is, as we look especially at the secondary schools, is we are seeing that schools are working and their average daily attendance rates are starting to improve. And we're seeing that pretty consistently across the secondary schools at this point in time. So it does go to show that when concerted efforts are made in this regard, that we do realize improvements in attendance. And this just provides a 3-year comparison from 2016 to 2019 on annual rates for the percentage of students displaying adequate attendance, severe attendance, and chronic attendance. You can see that last year, about 54.4% of our students district-wide were showing adequate attendance, and then you can see the severe and chronic there. As we look through the data, really our aim is to engage in early intervention. So when we see those early patterns of non-attendance occurring, how do we get in there early and not wait until those patterns are established before attempting to intervene with students? So at this point, through our strategic plan that we are developing with our attendance team, we have 3 components of Project Engage this year. This really outlines our areas of focus as we engage in the work this year, and Donna Hedgecock is going to talk about this area.
Okay, again, I'm Donna Hedgecock. I'm an attendance specialist. I'm also the liaison for the Teen Parent Program. The first component of Project Engage is to increase the alignment between the accessibility of all attendance-related guidance, supports, and processes with Florida statute and board policies. The work we're doing in this area involves researching and aligning our attendance procedures with Florida statute and any other changes that go along with that, as well as the board policy and our district code of conduct. The attendance staff is in the process of refining an attendance manual which will provide organization, guidance, and clarification regarding attendance issues and procedures. A detailed procedural flow chart, which Dr. Jacobs already showed you, has already been developed and it is being currently utilized by our schools. Our goal is to create a one-stop shop for attendance and attendance-related issues.
Then component 2, and that is LaVon Walker.
Hi, I'm LaVon, and I am one of the attendance specialists as well as the restorative justice facilitator, one of the facilitators for the district. As far as engaging and implementing our processes, we've streamlined our efforts and we're using focus more. So we have worked really closely with Kelly Negro and Greg McDonald, who have been phenomenal, very, very patient with us as we're figuring out what we want and what we need to show. But they work with us, and so now we have letters available for every school so that they can generate letters at 3, 5, 10, and 15 days. They can go right into focus and get those letters out so that they're communicating it with the parents consistently. We've also created, we've revised the student documentation tab and made that more open to all staff so that they're able to go in there and make documentation when they contact the parent, when they send out a letter, so that we're able to use that information if we do need to move forward with some sort of a referral, whether to truancy court or to CENSFINS. We have that supporting documentation that shows that the school has done outreach and that, as in Dr. Jacobs' term, a Tier 3 intervention is needed. So we need to go to a higher level, and we need to have that information that's going to support our referrals.
And then, last but not least, Component 3, and Eric Seymour is going to be sharing about that.
Hi again, Eric, Court Liaison, Mentorship Program.
Can you move a microphone down? Sorry, we hear you, but not everybody in the TV audience.
Yes, again, Eric Seymour. I'm the Court Liaison and Mentorship Program Coordinator. First, increasing awareness, putting together school-based attendance teams that develop the strategic plans for truancy, and information is gathered on ongoing attendance data reviews so that attendance team can effectively advise and engage stakeholders. Prevention, we continuously monitor attendance patterns closely to determine the effectiveness of the strategies that are put into place. We provide feedback and revise the plan if necessary. Many of our plans we have to look at because we want to get the best out of each and every day that students are to attend school. We establish individualized connections to struggling students so that the attendance teams and stakeholders have the necessary information to provide for the proper resources. Many of our students, again, struggle to get to school, and we need to know exactly what these patterns represent. We work to include our community by making them a vital part of all of our efforts to keep our students in school. I utilize an HMS, or Hear My Story program, where we have trained speakers who share their stories to actually inspire students who are struggling to attend school. We also have been invited to speak at several churches. We've been at DATA, Norman C. Hayslip programs, shelters, and several radio talk shows. We also like to keep our local judge involved. The judge will do as much as we ask based on what our concerns are. So that's it.
Okay. We're going to do, everybody have questions? Okay. We're going to go down the line, okay?
Wait, she can start if she wants to start
Okay.
out.
You want to start?
Okay, thanks. All right. You know, attendance has been a concern of mine. So I have several. You mentioned that you are researching. And attendance isn't often a student matter, but more often a parent matter. And what programs have you researched that support more parent participation?
So we've been researching, and what we find is really it becomes more of a student matter at the secondary level, and it's more of a parent matter at the elementary level. What we know is similar to other areas, when we create equitable and inclusive school climates through engaging in culturally responsive practices, that is a major thing that will draw parents in to partnering with the school. And so when we have warm, welcoming school environments, that certainly can impact it. Now, as far as Tier 1 strategies, PBIS, positive behavior intervention and supports, that is one of the major strategies or school-wide programs that has been found to be effective. And there can be parent components included in that, and PBIS can be looked in very different ways at very different schools. So those would be two ways. Now, as far as a specific parent program, we have not come upon one at this point in time. But I think, incorporating things like what Mr. Seymour has shared, Hear My Story, which really connects with the oral tradition of a lot of our diverse student populations, those are the specific things that we're trying to incorporate in various areas in order to reach all of the different students.
Okay, I'm gonna argue a little bit on your statement. You said it's not a secondary issue as a parent. It is. And it should be.
Not a secondary issue. It becomes more, there becomes more of a responsibility of the student as well at the secondary level.
I understand that, but I think I'm going to put the onus back on the parent. You're a parent, you're a parent, you're a parent. And sometimes, back in the dark ages when my kids were in high school, I might not have known if they were skipping class. Now, don't we have apps or something where a parent can be in tune with when their child is doing such as that? And so I'm going to say the onus is back on the parent.
So we do, and what we will do is also work with schools, because there is a culture and climate at each individual school. So our job is to then support the schools and how they will maintain that. And that's what our folks do. So each individual school has a way in which they will elicit some parent participation, and then we will support them in how they do that. So it is a individual schools-based decision on how they invite in.
But to Terry's point, we have that app. If every parent that you're dealing with, specifically, right, we have targeted students, if you're sitting with them and saying, let's download the app because you're going to get a notification within how long that your student is not at school today. Are we doing that?
Our teachers, our parents receive phone calls whenever their student is absent, whether it be from class, so they get that connected telephone call immediately. So they are notified whenever their child misses a class every day. And I do, reemphasize what has been said as far as the engagement piece, because when you look at the data, you see that Fellsmere Elementary has the highest level, and we know that's a school that has very high parent involvement, a lot of outreach. So that's what we're trying to do, is help our schools continue to build that culture and be warm and inviting places where students want to go. Classrooms, in our high school classrooms, is one of the challenges that we face with skipping. One of the biggest issues at our high schools in terms of even discipline is skipping. So why is that students don't want to be in class? And those are the areas that we begin to help teachers recognize and work toward.
I'm glad you brought up the culture and the climate, because that is important. The onus is on the parent, but also the parent's going to say to the child, why don't you want to be in that classroom? And then again, well, the teacher this or the teacher that. So then that parent has to bring it up to that school. So if our schools and our classrooms are inviting, of course, kids are going to want to be there. We're competing with lots of things via television, video games, we know that. But that app, I think, is extremely important, that we're connecting with our parents. Suspensions, they're considered being out of school, correct? Okay. So I do know that there are programs where kids can attend those programs if they're suspended. Do they get their attendance forgiven, or is there allowance for that?
There's an alternative to suspension program that provides an academic component. Then that is a as you use the word, forgiven piece. That is an allowable alternative, a true alternative to suspension. If there is just a program that they intend in lieu of being at home that does not have an academic component, then it is still considered a suspension.
Right, and so do we have that data available?
The data available as
for
to
the ones that are approved programs?
We do not have an approved program in our district at this time.
Right.
Altos does not have an academic component at this time.
Interesting. I'll talk about another district. I know that we had that. And it was really helpful that if you're going to suspend a student, that you say to the parent while you're in that conversation with the parent, hey, by the way, if they go to this program, they won't be considered absent tomorrow. And instead, they can get that information they're missing.
Altos is a community partner that we are working with, and we are seeking to provide that other educational component. We have been working and discussing it extensively to try to include that and make that a true alternative to suspension program for us as an alternative to exclusionary practices. And we would love to implement that, and we are working diligently on getting that as a critical piece.
Yay, I can't wait to see that.
Especially for our secondary folks.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that because I think that's a key piece that's missing. Again, I'm not a suspension proponent, but when that happens, I think parents need to have that alternative. And then I'm glad to hear that focus is being used for documenting school interventions. Are we following up that schools are actually doing that? Because I don't know how frustrated I could be when you have a student that is going through all these things and the teacher is saying, well, yes, we've done this and this and this, and then there's no documentation.
So this has been a critical realignment of this division in this group. When we first met, that has been one of the pieces why we went back to the focus on state statute and board policy. And that is because we needed to see that the first steps, which outline that documentation piece, were in place. And hence the flow chart, the rolling out of the information, and this group has done an excellent job. And these folks working with their schools and participating in those interventions at this level have to participate first. The schools have to participate in that documentation, and they are the next level coming in. So it is working now, and we are doing these data chats internally within our division and in this Office of Student Services, and that comes from the data that's coming from the schools. And there is an increase in attendance, decrease in the gap. So it's
Right.
working.
And I'm seeing that your resources are now getting aligned, and we have a team approach, and it's wonderful that I'm seeing that because I don't think that was in place before. I could
These
be
guys
wrong.
they're working very hard.
Thank you. And I want to say that sometimes when you do this and you're going through and you're getting to the root cause and you're asking, why aren't you going to school, and why, and then you're finding out that kids are homeless. So what are the procedures or the steps that we're doing when we discover things like that?
I think you all can speak to a lot of what
Well,
you've already seen and done.
Yes, speaking on that, we do have programs. I deal with Sins Fins, the Children's Home Society, quite a bit, and refer many of our students and have been very successful. I think this year we've had over 45 referrals, and of those referrals, many of the students are really back in school doing well. But there are others that we need to also have them find other resources to assist the families. A lot of families have issues within the home that we really have not much control of.
Right, and I know the school can only do so much, but I appreciate that, and I think that number is startling to some people in Indian River County.
Yes.
So thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Rosario?
Do you all go to the homes? You do, right? So if a student is habitually absent, what happens when you typically knock on the door and a student is home? Just for my knowledge, what happens?
Well, we are very careful in how we handle every situation. We don't threaten. We just provide support as best that we possibly can. We try and get information from the family so that we can properly assist that group, the student, the family, and everyone else involved. And that is the biggest piece. So once we get that information, if we can't entice the student to come back to school, then we provide that program or resource that's going to work from within the home.
So you mentioned program Altos?
Altos.
Altos?
Altos.
Can you please talk a little bit about that? I'm not familiar with.
Yes, there's a group, they're a community partner, and they offer as an alternative to suspension, and they have a counseling component. So students that are suspended can attend Altos, and they are located now at the GYAC in their new facility. It's lovely. And they are located, and they offer students, instead of them going home or being in the neighborhood, in any neighborhood or home alone during the day, they can attend there. Our schools have that information. They can assign them there, or parents can bring them to attend instead of being at home if they are externally suspended. So not only are they able to go there and attend and be overseen by adults, but they also have a counseling component in which they can address some of the reasons that they may or may not have been involved or in some trouble. So, which is a fabulous component to getting them back and restoring some of their concerns that they may have had or issues that a child may have had with with somebody else or in and of themselves.
Does a program have to have certain components to it to be considered an academic alternative?
They have to have
They
a
do.
teacher.
They have to have a
They have
teacher.
the teacher, they have to have the same education that they would have typically during the day. So we have to provide the educational services that they would have during their typical school day.
So what about our alternative center? Or our alternative school?
There's not a service classroom or provision at our alternative center to have students come in and out right now.
What do you mean? We have a school what am I missing?
The students are assigned to that school, just like they would be ex-elementary school, ex-middle school, and they report there in the morning, and they have a class schedule. When we talk about, and we have staffed that school based on the enrollment that is there. This particular program, in order to make it an academic, we would need to assign and fund additional teacher allocations. Now, you can locate it wherever you want to, and however that's structured, but that's what Dr. Parandozzi is talking about, is right now we don't have a staffing allocation because that's provided by a professional or a partner.
Right.
But we
so that's
have
an
our
outcomes.
alternative school.
At the alternative school, we would still need an additional space, classroom, space, teacher. We would still have to have the entire allocation at that site.
Correct. So the location, you could place it at any building in our facility where you would have a classroom, an extra classroom that's not being used, okay? If that's at the high school or a middle school, you'd have to have an empty classroom, meaning there's no students assigned to that classroom, to say, okay, now we're going to offer this program, and it's going to be housed in that classroom. But then you've got to staff it with a teacher.
Okay. So
And right now, we don't have a funding stream for that, but you don't have a budget for that. That service has been provided by this partnership. If we want to add the academic component, we would need to go back to finance, set up a center for that, wherever that might be, establish a classroom, and staff it with the appropriate staff.
So I think I understand my disconnect. And you all are talking about attendance truant, or students who have excessive attendance can go to this program as an alternative to,
Anyone.
anyone
Any
can
stu-
go to
well-
this program as an alternative.
If we back up, the question from Ms. Berenborg was students that are
Suspension.
suspended,
Right.
externally suspended, were they allowed to attend a program? Did we have an alternative to exclusionary discipline practices?
I thought our kids who were suspended go to the alternative school.
No, those are,
That's an alternative to
Long-term.
expulsion.
Gotcha.
Not a
Okay,
daily.
that's my disconnect then.
We're going down the line.
Okay, so my other question was, I have two more. My other question was, looking at the attendance, the daily attendance rates, when you recognize as a team, when you recognize that a particular school is typically falling behind the average, or might be pretty low, essentially, what happens at that point? I mean, if you notice that nothing has changed, right, or that your recommendations are not being implemented, what happens at that point? Because I'm looking at Dodgertown. Dodgertown is pretty, centrally located, right? We might have people in that immediate area. They might walk to the school, students who are bused. I'm trying to figure out why it's so low in attendance. But then you mentioned school climate, so I'm trying to figure out what we do as a team to encourage schools to improve. Go ahead.
So there are a multitude of reasons why students are absent from school. I mean, one of it, in that specific school, we had an instance where we discovered that a student had sickle cell anemia. And so that student wasn't coming to school on days that he was sick. And so we worked together with the mom to say, okay, now you can do partial hospital homebound. So when he can go to school, so it's just problem solving those types of issues. Sometimes it is a lack of resources, and we try to help support them. There are times when families just don't follow the rules and don't come through. And so that's when we go with a more punitive. Sometimes there may be truancy court, or there may be some additional support through SINS-PENS Children's Home Society. Those are our two sanctions, basically, that we would use. As far as I know that Dodgertown has in place incentives and rewards for students coming to school. So for us, I believe it's been more of an issue of problem solving some of those social issues and helping families to overcome some of those barriers.
So my last comment, thank you for that. I appreciate it. My last comment has to deal with exit interviews. Now, I don't know how Florida works, but when I was in New York and I was the assistant principal at an alternative school over there, we had an exit interview process for students who aged out. But my alternative school was for students who were over age and undercredited, so they could be there until 21. I'm unfamiliar with the Florida statutes on this particular area here with regard to attendance and aging a student out, God bless you, or offering an alternative. Like, our alternative was for them to receive a high school diploma. But if they didn't complete their program, even though we would try to expedite it, if they didn't complete the program by the time they turned 21, they couldn't, graduate, obviously. But even then, they were still offered to either drop out. If they, of course, they're 20 years old and they wanted to drop out, they had that opportunity, God bless you again, or they could go to a GED program. For us, we would have to have an exit interview with that child as the alternative rather than being habitually truant. At that point, there was a counseling session, there was an interview, a form was actually filled out, and the child was over age, did not need parent permission, and the child signed out. There was if we needed to engage in ensuring that the child would be admitted into the GED program, we would facilitate that. What is the process here in our district and/or in Florida? If you all can just kind of help me with that. Do we have that? Do we not? What does the law say? Okay.
We do have that. Our guidance counselors will counsel students out. Our guidance counselors at each of our schools will counsel students out once they reach that decision, whether it's by age, 16 years of age or higher, that they can go ahead.
16.
They can, by state statute, 16 years old, they can withdraw. Now, their driver's license, their driver's privileges are suspended unless they are actively enrolled in a GED or some other kind of academic programming.
Until when?
18.
And/or I reinstate them. So
And/or?
if they are reinstated, if they can show that they've been in school for 30 consecutive days, then I'll reinstate them.
Interesting. So a student cannot admit themselves to a school, but they can sign themselves out at 16.
No. Compulsory, the state has compulsory attendance up to age 16. After that, a student can drop out. However, guidance counselors aren't trying to get them out at 16. What they're saying is they facilitate them in the direction that is best suited. They try to keep them through graduation process.
Yeah.
However, unfortunately, we do have some children that are truant, go through that truancy process. And we do try to do everything we can to bring them back. Sometimes it is all the way through truancy court. And that's how that process will work. We don't necessarily have that opportunity to get them all the way through an alternative site, but they do have the option for a GED program. We look at the TCTC programs. We look at several options for students to get them for college and career ready, including students with disabilities. Every post-secondary child, everything they do post-secondary is tracked by the state, so we want to ensure that they have some sort of option to go to.
You may not have this number, but do we have numbers on how many children fall into that category?
I do not have that
We
now.
don't?
It's few, because the
Very
schools
few.
really do try to keep the students in. They counsel them to Career Source or
We don't have those
TCTC.
numbers, so I can't speak to that.
If I could suggest, because I know there's a lot of topics here that, because of time, there are the policies that are on the agenda tonight. So if there are some, I want to make sure we get everybody's questions, but I know there are some topics that may be deeper in conversation that the staff is going to be very available to you, that we can do some follow-ups if you'd like. I just want to make sure that we don't miss out our time on our policies this afternoon, but the staff will avail ourselves to all of you.
I'll just say what my questions are, and we can decide whether we want to have that conversation now or move on, because I agree with you. Let's get through our agenda. First off, props. Great slides. Thank you. I'm a fan of slides I really like, so whoever did that, thank you. Also, props on, I really appreciate your comments about reflective practice and how you do your work that way, and that you alluded to your own departmental strategic plan. I really value that. We've had conversations as a board about having our own strategic plan, and there was some issue about the value of individual plans versus the district plan. I'm a fan of plans within units. I think that makes a lot of sense, so thank you for your leadership on that. The MTSS model for attendance, can you just clarify for me if that is part of the overall MTSS strategy, or if you guys came up with that as a way to take the MTSS model and put it into the framework of attendance?
So MTSS as a framework is the overall framework within all schools as well as the district for all types of supports. And when you really look at that, we're looking at academic supports, behavioral supports, social supports, and psychological supports. So the attendance, integration of attendance into the multi-tiered framework is not a new or novel idea by us. It's actually in line with best practices for supporting students, and so it provides a systematic and systemic way for schools to be able to understand how to provide those attendance supports.
Thank you. I've mostly seen MTSS in relation to other types of behavioral supports, and particularly around discipline and behavior. So I appreciate the way you've put that in this framework. And, you know, I've already got you at educational conferences presenting this. We may not have time for this now, but I'll just state the question. We can talk about it another time. I'm interested in hearing more about how Ms. Walker does the restorative reentry, because that's a really important piece about how when kids feel like they've been distanced from their academic learning units and from their work, how we re-engage them in ways that bring them, not only catch them up on their work, have them feel, again, a part of the classroom and a part of the school, and reconnected with their teachers. I don't know if we have time to talk about that now. I'll just list through the questions, and then we can decide if there's a...
We were thinking maybe because the rest of you may have additional questions, because it spurs us to think of more questions. If you want to email those all to me, then I will make sure that I get them to the staff. We will answer them and then send the whole list back out to every board member, if that will work.
I appreciate that. And yes, that's helpful, and part of what I want to do is sort of have it on record so that people who may either currently or later watch this tape have a sense of what we're doing in those areas. But I do understand that, as always, we're time limited.
Right.
You also talked about electronic media relative to attendance, and there was a slide that said you would check their electronic media and correlate that with their attendance. I'm kind of wondering more what that means and how you do that.
So I think the point that you're alluding to there is the electronic media getting more information out about the importance of attendance. So we're really using social media to get that information out and highlight some of the work that some of the schools are doing, which is really good work, because that increases awareness for our school stakeholders in that regard. Now, as far as focus, because we've now got the parent documentation form, it's finally in focus. We're getting ready to roll that out to schools instead of having it paper-based. We will be able to more closely monitor whether those are being completed for those students that are demonstrating patterns of non-attendance.
Because I check focus all the time, and I don't know that parents always, you know, I'm like, what do you mean you were late for sixth period? You know, I can check that. I'm not sure every parent is on that as much as I am, but I thought you're checking their like Snapchat and Instagram accounts. I'm thinking, how do you do that? Please tell me.
Sign me up for that.
Sign me up, how do you do that?
How they take their phone.
Right, well, Snapchat, I'm not really adept at. The Altos program, can you just tell me what the hours of that are, how long they're in it for days that they're out of school?
Whatever the assigned days are, and whatever.
They're in it for a full day. What are they doing there if they're not doing academic work?
They do whatever the academic work that they assign, and then their counseling component.
If they're doing, but what they only get credit for the academic work in as it relates to the work that they've been assigned, but they can't get credit for it as attendance because there's no teacher on site. Do I understand that right? It's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, I have other stuff, but I'll leave it be for the moment. Thank you.
Me? Oh. I was approached by some funders in Indian River County regarding Altos. They had some questions because the community partner that we work with had gone and done some presentations regarding the program and looking for grant support. So I just wonder what opportunities there are, again, with strategic partnerships to continue to expand the possibilities of what we're able to offer and fund. And I'll leave that at that. The only thing I'll say in closing out the conversation is, first of all, Eric, I've been lucky enough to be able to attend some of the Hear My Story vetting and some of the presentations, and it's been really awesome. These are local people that have beaten the odds to be able to find success in life in many different ways. And it's been a great experience for me, and the more students that get exposed to hearing stories about people who are able to do that, it's wonderful. And the last thing I'll say is, when I was campaigning for school board, I remember I met with Freddie Wolford, and I went and sat down with him and had a conversation. We talked about schools in Indian River County, and he was talking to me about when Gifford High School was desegregated, and the graduation rate was like 100% when there was Gifford High School. And then it continued to decline after the schools were desegregated, he said, because parents were very involved at Gifford High School, and then once the schools were integrated, they felt very separated. And it just spoke to me, and it's always kind of been in my head, that piece that, Terry talks about, that parent component, that, how do you bring back those parents, right, that have felt to some degree in Indian River County, especially when we talk about minority achievement, that there has been a lack of connection and relationship. Father Benedict or Father Ed from St. Benedict's talked about legacy, this idea of creating legacy at a school, and how important it is that students feel connected and feel some sense of legacy at the school. So, especially when you look at high school and things like that, the ideas of school spirit. I know this board had kicked around the idea of a track. I've always thought that would be an amazing component for, I know we don't have the money right now, but I'm just saying, those ideas of how do you connect students to feeling, how many different ways can we engage students so that they feel a part of the legacy of their school, because I think that really speaks a lot to them wanting to go there. So I think we get away from that the more we have school choice, because community schools change, but I think that we still have the opportunity to create community schools as much as possible. And I know some of our principals, like Principal Burnett at Dodgertown, is working very hard to do that. I have some additional questions. I'll email them, but thank you for all of your hard work. I look forward to continued improvement with attendance.
No, I appreciate you being here today. This is something that I'm very interested in. I think it's something that we need to stay on top of, because I think if we're all aware of it, we can address the issues. But, I'm looking at these numbers. I think it's something that we need to keep on our radar. And I have several questions. I'm going to give them to Dr. Moxley, and I'm sure we can learn from each other in our questions. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank my team. They're awesome, and thank you very much for allowing us to present.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move along to our next agenda item. You have two policies that I'm bringing forth tonight to start the administrative rulemaking process. The first one is 2460. This is a current policy that we have. The last round of policies that you did, it was recommended to delete 2460.01, I believe was the number, because it was, you have this exceptional student education, and then there was a separate policy that had like 3 sentences that said least restricted environment, and it was determined that that was redundant. Well, when we really looked at it, and I think some of our parents that asked some questions, and we realized that there were 2 sentences in the policy that was deleted that did not show up in this policy. We have added those to it. So in essence, when you look at the policy number 2460, it is on the top of the 3rd page. You're going to see, actually, I think it's 2 sentences that are being added here. They represent the 2 of the, I think, total 5 sentences in the policy that was deleted. These 2 sentences were not reflective in this paragraph. The other 3 sentences were. So we are simply just adding them to make sure that we do not lose them. I think they're important when they talk about continuum of services in the least restricted environment, and talks about placement options. And it also, when you talk about more restrictive environments, they give some examples. And so we just want to make sure that we didn't lose that. So that's the easy one. The second one is a state requirement, and board members, I have a copy of the memo that was sent out by our Chancellor, Jacob Oliva, and I'm going to go back to why this is coming forth to you. You'll see in the letter and in the chart that is in board docs, for anybody in the public viewing audience, if you go to board docs, we have a summary of this. But in 2016, if you'll go back and remember, the Florida's electorate voted to pass Florida's medical marijuana legalization initiative. And it was known as Amendment 2, and it was a constitutional amendment, and that passed in the state of Florida. So what happened then is in 2017, the Florida legislature passed Senate Bill 8A. And in that, when it became law, when it was signed by the governor, it outlined some medical marijuana reforms. And there was some section added for school boards. And in it, it says, each school board shall adopt a policy and a procedure to allow a student who is a qualified patient as defined by that statute, 381.986, to use marijuana obtained in accordance with that statute. So it is very prescriptive. So there is a delicate line here of what is prescribed medical marijuana for medicinal purposes with very strict guidelines versus I'm in possession of marijuana and it's not medically prescribed. That falls under your student code of conduct, drug-free, zero tolerance kind of laws here. So when this came, we got a reminder from the chancellor that we are now down to the deadline here of when a policy must be done, passed, implemented, and we must report it to the Department of Education. So some districts went ahead right out of the gate after this was passed in 2017, did a policy. I went back and checked because I thought, okay, here we are, 2019, you know, how did we get here? I went back and really in Neola, the consultant that we use in our policies, it really was, this was new, this was controversial, frankly. They were kind of the opinion to take a more conservative approach to it. So it did not come right out of the gate. But now the department is saying you are now down where every school board, you must be in compliance. And obviously if you're not, they are now going to take whatever actions are outlined when you are not in compliance with statute or constitutional amendments. So you can see by the memo that if we already had a policy, which we don't, so that October 18th does not apply to us, but if you have not adopted a compliant policy, a draft must be sent to the department no later than December 1st, and board adoption, meaning it has to be all the way through the process by December 31st. So here we are. So today, you have a copy of the draft policy. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but just from a timeline standpoint, it is on the agenda tonight for you to start the 28-day count. If we do that, your board and Mrs. Esplin's already started the advertisement process that has gone for tonight. We'll have the 28 days. That takes you to your special board meeting on November 26th. So I anticipate, otherwise it would be December 10th. I would like to request on that special board meeting that we go ahead and also include the public hearing on this policy so that we can meet the December 1 deadline as opposed to the December 31st. It does give you a little bit of a window of cushion that if there is any question or public comes to speak to it and there is any revision that needs to be done, that you have still a window of time to get there. So that's kind of the timeline that I'd like to bring forth. So let's talk just a few minutes about the policy. And Ms. DeGresta may want to speak to this as well. So in your packet, you do have a copy of it. It is a new policy, so we do have a new policy number of 5330.03. It is identified as medical marijuana and to qualified students in schools. And this policy really outlines the administration to meet the constitutional language of it. And when you go down through, the policy is really starts with definitions. You can see that going through to the second page. And then down at the bottom, we start the administration of it. And when we get down to it, you can see that it is very carefully outlining that our school nurses, our administrators, no staff member is going to handle the medical marijuana. That if a student has been prescribed that by a doctor, I'm just giving you a synopsis of it, there is going to be an implementation form that the parent will come in and fill out. It will be identified. The parent or the guardian, whoever is approved to administer that, will come to the school with the medical marijuana, whatever form that might be in. They will administer it to the school. We will provide we'll agreed upon what time that will take place, where the location that will be administered, so that it is out of the view of the public, the school, the student body, that type of thing. All that will be outlined in this form, and that everybody will agree to that, but we will not store it, we will not handle it, we will not administer it. No staff member from the superintendent down will have any part in that, other than we will give the parent or guardian the access to administer it in the time if it's during the school day, in accordance to the form and the doctors there. You will see the policy does talk about the authorization of it. It does talk about the responsibilities of the parent and the caregiver with it. They can't just show up and come multiple times. The student can't call and say, Mom or Dad, parent, guardian, come. I need this to be administered. It has to be very clearly outlined. It's at 10 o'clock, it's at 2 o'clock, whatever it may be, but we're not doing it 10 times during the day unless the doctor is prescribing that.
I have a question. Matt? I'm sorry.
Let's get through this real quick and then
Yeah, it's
we'll
a question
go back.
regarding the administrator.
You will also see the responsibilities of principals and administrators outlined on the policy. And finally, we end up with the consequences of rule violations. So if you have a prescription for it, but you are not following that prescription and you violate it, like for example, I may have a prescription, I'm a student, have a prescription, and Mom or Dad just says, hey, I can't bring it to school today, you just take it, put it in your backpack. No, there's a provision, that's a consequence. We're not following the procedures. They cannot have it on them. They're very clear outline. And I want Ms. DeGresta to add anything that I might have forgotten.
I think you did a very comprehensive job. I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
And that's the policy.
Everybody has questions, so we're going to start this.
Skip me for now, because my question might get asked. It's fine. That's all right.
Do we have a policy about administering prescription opioids to students? And if we do, is the school allowed to administer other prescription drugs in ways that are different from what we're permitting on this?
We have policies outlining the administration of prescription medications that are handled through the nurse. If, I don't know that I'd have to go back and pull the policy specifically. I don't know that it specifically says opioids, but I mean, because we have prescription drugs that fit in the opioid category. If a doctor administers and has a prescription outlined that a student will take this at, 7:30 in the morning, and that's on file. There's an approved policy, procedure, medical form, and we do it as prescribed by the doctor.
So just, so to clarify, because I'm not against this, but I'm wondering if in this, because it's so new, right, because it's an area we're unfamiliar with, are we being more restrictive with this than we are with other substances that we now know are also potentially harmful, but ways that we are not, that we are allowing school caregivers to administer in ways we are not with that? I just want to be conscious of that, and ways in which we are either, that by those limitations, we may be putting hardships on families. I'm not suggesting that I'm advocating a different policy. I just want to be clear that what we're doing here is consistent with what we do in other things that have medical implications.
I think there are some differences, and I think there are some similarities. We are very restrictive in our other policies that a student can't have opioids on their person. Those have to be given, they are stored, they're under a lock and key, that type of thing. That a student can't just carry that in our pocket. If a student had a prescription drug that was not, they weren't following procedure, we have disciplinary consequences outlined for that. If I have a particular pain medicine that I'm carrying and I carry it and I give it to you or I sell it to you, then that's distribution that is not following, that's outside of the student code of conduct. We have consequences for that. There are prescriptions that are not considered illegal substances either. You know, so if I have a prescription, X prescription, that may be different than marijuana.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm going to say, my question was Dr. Schiff's question. I think this is, and my question would really be to Suzanne, projecting going forward, this is new, this is very restrictive. I think this will be challenged at some point. And we will end up seeing nurses distributing, administering as they would with any other substance that's prescribed by a doctor in the law. I mean, I'm curious about that. Because I would imagine it'll be challenged at some point.
The distinction that I will draw for you is that the medications that Dr. Schiff is referring to are not illegal under federal law. Marijuana is still considered an illegal substance under federal law. And so the very fine line that we're working around at the moment is state law allows limited use of medical marijuana in accordance with the Constitution and the statutes. Federal law right now still prohibits it. We receive federal funding, and so that's why you see the tortured language on the first page that if we receive any type of notice, either in general or specific, that our allowance of medical marijuana on a school campus, which is partially funded with federal funds, we will immediately take steps to comply with the federal government, or you may be jeopardizing your federal funding. We don't know that will happen. It's not happened in other states that have medical marijuana and that allows some level of use on a public school campus. I don't know what the future holds. And so that's why that tortured language is in there, to give us the ability to say, we need to make a decision about our federal funding.
Can I follow up? Because I'm not arguing and I'm not disagreeing.
Of course.
But wouldn't prescription medication, though technically legal and federally legal, still, would it be illegal for minors and thus be in a related category?
But we are still dealing with a physician who has prescribed this opioid, let's say, for someone under the age of 16. We are still coming from a premise of a physician has prescribed it, and it's not otherwise prohibited by federal law to be on a public school campus. Wow. When we are governed by the Drug-Free Schools Act. It's a federal law, period. And it implicates our federal funding.
Really interesting.
So that's why I think you will see a huge, when this law first passed, we all said, federal law prohibits it, we're not doing a policy. and then state law passed a law, they passed a statute saying you shall have a policy. We've asked lots of questions. What does that do to a nursing license? Nurses should never touch it unless they are a caregiver as defined under the law, primary caregiver. They have to have a card. Otherwise, nurses should never touch it. It will implicate their license.
And I'm not disagreeing with the restrictions we have to take. And I imagine a student who, for example, has seizures, right, and takes medical marijuana for seizures and has a or two working parents who then, in order to take care of their kid, are required at regular intervals, if even possible, to leave their job, come administer medication. And again, I understand that we have to do what we have to do, given exactly the restrictions you've just described. But
That'll force the issue. That issue, it will force the issue at some point. It'll just be a matter of time, I would imagine.
Go ahead. So according to the policy, just to follow up with what Dr. Schiff was saying, according to what we wrote down and what several other districts have written in their policies, is that the qualified student or the patient may designate no more than one caregiver. So that caregiver could be anyone, so long as they are 21 years of age or over. And that falls in the back. It says if a qualified primary caregiver must be 21 years of age or older, a resident of the state who has agreed to assist with the qualified patient's medical marijuana. It doesn't say a parent.
right.
And that's what the law provides. So we have simply input into our procedure.
Be anybody.
We leave that, that's not our call.
Well, but what if it's a teacher
Well,
who's
it
the
has to
aunt of
be.
the student at the school? Could the teacher be the caregiver that administers the?
It cannot be an employee who
see
would
what I'm
be
saying,
on, but they would be working. They're on the job, doing a job.
During their lunch break.
Even if they're a parent. I'm still.
They cannot possess it on school property. They bring it, they have to hold it somewhere else. They come onto school property for the sole purpose of administering it, and then they need to take it back off.
Okay. Oh, my phone just fell. I want us to be very careful, because if we're going to follow the law, I want us to be very clear not to say it has to be a parent. That the caregiver here is defined as anyone whom the patient designates as caregiver.
It's on number C.
Under responsibility.
I'm
It's
looking
under-
at definitions.
Yes,
Correct.
on the
C.
second page, C.
First page,
Go to the second,
and then second page is C. Yes.
Correct,
I'm
correct.
looking at both first and
Correct.
second page.
correct.
So the primary caregiver must be 21 years of age or
Correct.
over. I get that, but on page 1, it indicates that it is the qualified student patient who may designate one caregiver to assist with that. So that one caregiver can essentially be anybody that they chose. I understand our responsibility to our own employees, I get that. But someone, an aunt, an uncle, I want to be careful that we are not saying only mom or dad. For this purpose, that mom or dad may be working, but that they have selected an other, whomever that other is, to be the caregiver.
They have to be a primary caregiver on the student's DOH application, and then it says,
They need to show up with a card that says, here, I'm the one. The state has said, I am the caregiver, and here's my card with
I
my
don't know what the
registration
card
number."
looks like. I know the card is specific to the patient. The card doesn't, I don't know if the card indicates who the caregiver is. For a minor, I don't know if the card indicates who the caregiver is. But I know that a medical marijuana card is for the patient, and the patient is the one who carries that on him or her, and the patient is the one who actually has to show that card when they are in possession of marijuana, medical marijuana for these
But a
purposes.
caregiver also has identification card.
I don't know that.
Oh.
I don't know that. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if legally, when okay, I know several people who are waiting in the mail for their card. they are the patients, but they are adults. I don't know about children. You see what I'm, so as an adult patient, they receive a card.
Right.
Their name is on that card as the patient, and that card they have to hold with them, you know, everywhere they go, if they are in possession of or not. And they show this card, and it has their name on it, and so on and so forth. The question that I have that we may not have the answer is, for a minor child who is receiving, who has a card, will there be a name on there that says who the caregiver is? I don't know. But according to our written policy, this policy is written as the patient is able to choose any caregiver that they want. So I just...
And Mrs. Rosario,
Yes.
if you turn to the second page, under capital C as in cat, up towards the top.
I see it.
Okay, it goes into the definition of a primary caregiver or caregiver. And if you look at paragraph number 2, this is again just coming from the statutory requirements. Whoever that primary caregiver must have registered with the Department of Health, and so they have that information as far as their registration, and they must have been designated as the caregiver for the qualifying student or patient's application. So this is all...
But this doesn't say that the caregiver receives a card himself.
They will have...
Oh, has a caregiver identification card.
Yes.
I see it, I see it, I missed it.
Yes, and the back room work that goes with this policy, there's a form.
Where is that form? Do we have to attach it to this?
No. This is the process, the flow chart, if you will, to be used at the school, to where the parent takes that form to their physician who fills in the information about the medical marijuana to be administered. And then the caregiver that's been designated, their information is included as well. So you have that information that's then brought back to the school, and the school works with the family or whoever it is to put together the plan for what time, what days, when are you coming, where are we going to set aside at the school for you to administer this particular medication. How long will it? Yes. How long will it take? And then they work out the logistics, if you will, of it. So that's all kind of the flow chart process to be worked out at the school.
So Broward County has really, a couple of the counties had a great presentation that I was able to print out, but I wasn't able to print it out for everyone. And it really, I don't mind sending it out to board members as soon as I'm able to make copies. What it is, it actually outlines what medical marijuana is, the terms, so on and so forth, who the task force is. But something that is on theirs, it says permissible forms of medical marijuana include CBD oils, which I didn't see anything here about CBD oils, gummy bears, chocolates, you know, food that have actual medical marijuana in it, and hemp drinks. You know, you can go to Publix and buy a hemp milk and hemp whatever. But this is, again, this is just from Broward, I'm just saying. They also included prohibited forms of medical marijuana, and that was the patch and smoking vapor. But my question, and I know that on ours, on letter H, capital H, it says prohibited forms of medical marijuana means vapors, patches, and any other forms. But what my question is, many prescriptions can be written for children to receive gummies.
It says permissible form of medical marijuana.
It says it
and then
right
it
here.
says oils, tinctures.
Edible products, lotions, blah, blah.
So
But H is contradictory to that. H says prohibited forms of it.
That means not allowed.
Vape, I know.
Vapors, patches, other forms, those are not, this says non-smokable, non-inhaling, such as yada, yada, yada. Vapors is smoking, inhaling. Patches, other forms of
other forms, but
that provide continuous delivery of medical marijuana. These are, you take them once and you're done. These suggest that you somehow have them on your body on a regular basis like a time release.
I just think that it sounds very contradictory to have any other forms there, because the any other forms,
Who knows what they're going to invent next week?
So I will tell you that our policy is modeled after the Broward. We went and got samples, and we went through them with a fine-tooth comb, and Broward's is the one that has been around the longest. Actually, this is almost verbatim from Broward.
from Broward.
To be honest with you, because it was the most comprehensive. I've not seen their PowerPoint, so their PowerPoint, but they've had it they've had it for at least a year, or from the inception of when it was permissible. So theirs is the most long-term one.
Okay.
My grandfather would say, times are a-changin', and apparently we need to change with them. The policy looks fine to me. I mean,
Mrs.
tricky.
Berenborg?
My turn?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. When I first looked at this, I thought, wow, I'm worried because this is opening a huge can of worms. Mostly because it's not our job to decide if this is right or wrong.
Right, that's correct.
We are caught in between a state law and a federal lack of law. And that's what's concerning to me about the can of worms. So knowing that we have to stay current on what might happen federally, and obviously we're going to have to bring this right back and decide what to do. I know that we have to follow what we're given. So knowing that, and I think this is the same question you were asking before. My concern was, are the rules violations? And she was asking is whether or not these policies, but the specific part about rules violations in here, is that in line with all of our other policies concerning medication? If you go to the rules violation section,
It's on the last page.
Would it need to be, Terry, if one's a legal substance and one isn't?
and that's what I'm wondering.
Is there a particular paragraph that you're referring to, just
No,
because I
I'm
need
just,
to
I'm
read it in
just playing devil's
context?
advocate that we're going to be okay,
Yeah.
That's what I worry about.
Well, I know we're in new era, we're in new chartered territory here. When I reviewed the policy, and I've looked at multiple districts, I think one of the things that is that because it is still viewed as an illegal substance, and again, we are trying to protect our employees as much as we are to provide access for a medically approved by a constitutional amendment and a law in the state of Florida for those individuals that have been prescribed that. But by the same token, you have to keep pretty tight, just like we do with our medicine policy, is if you are abusing the medicine policy, there is a disciplinary consequence for that.
Okay, and then that leads me to the next question, because I didn't see this specifically addressed. And I know, like with any other medication, kind of how we've dealt with it, but how will the policy address students that have been over-medicated?
Okay, you're going to have to expand your question, because in our medical procedure, if a doctor has prescribed it to be given X time in this dose, that's what we do.
All right, let me give you an example.
If the doctor has overprescribed, I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, so when a student is on medication, let's give an example, old days of Ritalin, okay? What would happen is the school would administer that medication at school, but then would also fill out information for the doctor, so their next visit, they'd say whether or not we see a difference in their change at school, behavior, physical, whatever it is.
Right.
That's my question is, are we working with doctors to make sure that that's happening so students aren't becoming over-medicated?
And in the past, I know what you're talking about, that was sourced from the doctor for us to give that feedback to them.
Is that happening with this?
I don't know the answer to this, because I've not personally had experience and exposure with prescriptions from medical doctors on medical marijuana components.
And
so
the Ritalin
I
was
don't know if their
use.
protocol is to follow up with schools like they did in the days with Red. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I worry about that
Yeah.
because,
I don't know
I
that
don't-
there's a provision for us to source that because we're not really involved in any aspect of this other than to facilitate the parent caregiver to have access to provide whatever that guideline is.
Okay, and then go to, seeing that you just said the parent caregiver, can you go to the section, it was C, extenuating circumstances, and why won't this go up?
Yeah.
Do you miss the days of sunscreen? Remember when we weren't allowed to give them sunscreen to put on?
Now, I remember that very well.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, going on a field trip, make sure you.
Put your
those
sunscreen on before
in
you leave, because you
before
can't
do
bring it to
Right.
school with you.
I can't do it for you.
No?
Okay, so on C where it says extenuating circumstances, and this is referring to when we're
The unknown.
having
Yeah.
it administered at school.
Right.
Okay? So it says any administration of medical marijuana, low THC cannabis that requires consideration outside of the rules outlined in this policy must be reviewed and approved by the coordinator of health services. Parents may make any request for consideration through the school principal. Question being, what happens if the caregiver can't administer the medication? That's happened with other medications in school. There's always a substitute. There's always a backup plan. What happens because there's one person with a card? Does that child not get that medication then that day? And if so, can that parent say, you know what, I can change the caregiver because that person can't do it anymore? Or I have a different caregiver coming tomorrow because that person has to work.
As long as that caregiver's information is on the forms filled out by the family and signed off on by the doctor.
So you said there can only be one caregiver.
Except,
That's what I'm saying, but this says
I-
extenuating circumstances with approval of the school principal. That's, to me, that's a little gray now,
no.
no?
If you go back to the first page,
Okay?
and we look at the definition of qualified student/patient. Paragraph number 1 says they may designate no more than one caregiver, but keep reading. Unless is the very last word, unless the qualified patient is a minor.
But
And the
you've
designated-
mentioned it a couple of times now, one caregiver, so,
Unless
Okay.
it's a minor.
okay, so
And
then
then
what?
more than one caregiver can be provided. But this, I mean, this isn't my law.
Okay, so I'm a principal of the school, right? The parent says that Jane Doe is going to come administer the medication to my child, okay? I agree, Jane Doe is going to come and do it. Now the parent's saying, no, Jane can't come, Jack Doe is going to come now. How is that going to work? Do we have those names listed?
No, that is up to that family and these caregivers to get the appropriate registrations with the State of Florida, the Department of Health, and to provide that information on the form. We're not going to allow 6 or 7 people to line up and say, I'll be the caregiver today.
Right.
It is up to the family to figure that out with the Department of Health. We are simply receiving information from a registration card saying they are authorized to do it.
So every
Right, so
time.
I guess my question then is, to that fact, that if I'm a parent and I'm filling out the form, do I have an order of preferences to the caregiver list of who can provide my child with this medication? You know, I just want it to be really, I'm cognizant of our principals and making sure that they're following what they need to follow and they're protected.
So first of all, when you read through the policy, we have designated, while the principal is over the school, that the plan is coordinated through our coordinator of health services, so that we have consistency from one school to the next in Indian River County. We know this is a new area, uncharted with that, and we did not want to leave it to 23 different interpretations.
Right.
So the plan, the form will be the same. You'll see the coordinator of health services throughout this document. That person will know every nuance as we're going through and how we're interpreting. So extenuating circumstances, the principal won't be the one approving extenuating circumstances. It references the coordinator of health services. Okay. And I'm sure, because we're all seeking for rule direction, from procedural direction from the Department of Education, What we're going to get, I don't know. But this is being talked about at every state meeting. Superintendents are talking about this because we all got the same memo and we're all asking these same questions. Because again, just like we don't want to be wrong about a student's medication, I do not want to put an employee in jeopardy of handling what would be considered an illegal substance. And so when the form is approved and it goes through the coordinator of health services, if there is a change or extenuating circumstances come out, that will go through the coordinator of health services, and that will be determined based on the family who has worked with the Department of Health. Is the caregiver that now that is extenuating circumstances because the first one can't come, so now we have to get a second one approved. Then it's on their onus to make sure they have the card, they're registered, and produce all that documentation to be on that form.
Okay, so if you'll go back to C then, where it says approved by the coordinator of health services, I get that. So that's the person that's approving who it is, who's on that list.
Is acknowledging the approval
that
of the
approval,
form.
right.
We don't approve who gets the card.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I meant.
Yeah.
All right. And underneath it, it says parents may make requests for consideration through the school principal. That's the line that I was considering.
Right.
So does that mean I want to change this so that's the person I talk to and then the principal contacts the coordinator of health services?
So what we have to do with this is so while this is in the rulemaking process, and this is where we end up, or if you're we will put a standard operating procedure that gets attached to this. That is when we communicate this to our principals. Okay, this is now policy, and here's the standard operating procedure. Here's this with FAQs.
Okay, good. Because, I have
because all this is going to be new to them.
Sure, because I have a concern that, a lot of this, the regulation is a question I have about how all this is regulated.
Yep.
You see CBC now out there and everything, and especially when you're talking about gummy bears and chocolate, that really scares me. But I'm concerned about the regulation part. That's not our job. I get that. Right. But I'm very concerned about that.
I totally agree.
Okay, we went through, I have questions, so let me ask and then we'll go back through if that's okay. My question goes back to, I think it would be in the area of B, request by parent guardian for authorization. So here's a question that I feel like we need to think ahead here. For example, my mom has MS, and I know MS is one of the uses for this. She doesn't use it, but I know that some of her friends who have MS, it's based on need to administer. So let's say, for example, we have a student with MS that the parent knows that the student is having the muscle spasms that night, but this isn't they don't use it on a daily basis, but the prescription says as needed, no more than every 6 hours. The way I read this, it pretty well states that that parent has to notify the principal 48 hours in advance. So there's really not that flexibility for an as-needed basis for a student that has a specific need but doesn't need it all the time. So how will we address that?
Where do you see 48 hours? Where are you getting 48 hours?
Yeah, I can't remember where it is.
Responsibility of caregiver, go down B.
At least 48 hours in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the initial start of the process. The form that the doctor fills out with regard to the student's use has to include the specific information about dosage, timing, whatever the restrictions are, how it's administered. The doctor has to provide that specific information. And then whatever that timing is, the plan that the school puts together, let's say that we have a parent appear on Monday to want to implement this process. We then need to get the physician's information, the caregiver's information. There's all the information that we have to get
So the
first.
48 hours refers to the initial.
To get it started, and
Okay.
then once we have it started, we look to the school's plan, the implementation plan, that will say, caregiver will appear on Monday at, 11 o'clock in the morning, and will appear at this office. Student will be brought over, they'll be put into this room, caregiver will administer, and then
But how do we address whenever it's a as-needed situation where it's not a student that needs it all the time, but has it for those extreme situations?
the physician is going to have to explain, as part of the information they provide, they will have to explain what that is.
But the way I read this, it's very specific, so somehow we need to make sure that gets,
So if the doctor, in the example you gave, if the doctor said as needed for muscle spasms, all right, but no more than once every 6 hours, okay? So student A goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, no muscle spasms. Thursday has muscle spasms at 10 o'clock in the morning. There would have to be some agreement, the student would come up and make that phone call, have access to make the phone call to the parent to say, I'm having muscle spasms, da-da-da-da-da. Parent will have to make that determination. We will not make that determination. We will provide access to the student or to make that phone call.
But Susie, you said at the beginning of this conversation that wouldn't be allowed, and I was looking and I was thinking to myself, how common is this going to be?
No.
Autism, Crohn's disease, like I'm researching what the uses are. It's
We're
interesting.
not saying you will come and administer this. We're just communicating to the parent based on the plan
Okay.
that was done. I agree with you. I can see this,
Seizures.
believe me.
There's a lot of things that.
Yes,
we
I mean,
can't- we
I
can't
see
have
this
control
as
over.
major
have to
issues.
cross the
We
bridges when
can't
we come
even
to it, I
begin
guess.
to imagine what they are, and I'm not an expert in this on a medical, I don't even begin to say I know a layman's bit about it. I just know what the law
Well,
says.
right, and I think though, my point is, when we communicate this to the principals, is that these are the written policy rules, but we understand there are going to be unique situations, and even though we need to follow this, we need to be mindful that if it needs to be tweaked or adapted, that, we're not so rigid, and we have to, I guess, communicate that through ESE and.
I have a slightly different, and I get, we can't figure out every possible occurrence. But let's say, for example, there's a child who needs this for, let's say, seizures. And either the parent has a very restrictive workplace that doesn't allow them to leave, so they can't administer, so maybe they find somebody else. Let's say, and this is probably extreme, and potentially unlikely, but let's say, there's a car accident and they can't get there. And the child has a seizure and harms himself or somebody else. What's our liability then?
Typically, when a student has a health condition, there is a plan established at the school. Part of that plan may be with regard to medical marijuana, but otherwise the plan would address what happens in the event of a seizure. There are other medications that treat seizures. So is that something that a physician has ordered, yes or no? If the answer is no, then we call 911. I mean, let's not forget that we don't always have the medical expertise on a school campus to address every medical condition that occurs.
Yeah,
We still call 911.
Sure. I could see a parent, accusing us of some kind of mistreatment because we didn't do what we knew there was to be due, or we didn't create the circumstances to prevent this from happening.
But we will never have a stockpile of medical marijuana at every school.
No, but,
Not under the current laws.
I can think of, I did not realize it was a treatment for Crohn's. I can sit here and name 3 students in my child's grade with Crohn's. So I had no idea, and that would be a symptom-based, I just think it's interesting.
But not every parent's going to choose to treat
They're
that
not, but-
particular illness with medical marijuana.
But they may in the
But
future.
they may in the future.
I don't know the
Yeah,
answer
that's
to
why I
that.
said, you know, we
Have to
have to
amend.
trust
Yep.
the parent and the medical physician and then follow the best protocols that we can
It's
put in
interesting.
place to protect everybody.
So we are 26 minutes over, but we're going to wrap it up with,
I just wanted to, for the public, make mention that medical marijuana is not the same as the street marijuana. Some people may not know that, and they may assume that that's the same thing, and it's not the same thing. Medical marijuana has little to no THC, and it's the THC which causes the the high part of the street marijuana. So I want to make sure that medical marijuana, you know, that's what we're talking about. I also wanted to ask, and I need to ask, at the school level for our policies and procedures, or for our procedures rather, who is the person, and you may not know this now, but we're constantly mentioning the registry and that the caregiver needs to be registered on this registry, the State Department of Health. Who at the school level or the district level will be checking this registry to verify
Our
ID?
coordinator of health services.
That person?
They work with our health department all the time.
Okay. And CBD products. That's not mentioned here. It's not medical marijuana. You can go into a CBD shop. You can buy over the counter if you're, you know, over 18 years of age. CBD is not medical marijuana. CBD is just,
I thought it was mentioned.
I didn't see it anywhere here, but
It says
it's
like-
not part of the medical marijuana. CBD is something completely different. Has that, the question here is, has that conversation come up at all? CBD products? I assume it hasn't, because we're not creating a policy for it.
No.
But it's
I-
not illegal, it's not.
I'd want to do more research on that, to be honest, because there are products that you can't purchase under the age of 18.
Correct, that's what I
So
said.
technically, they would be prohibited
Yeah.
of our students to have.
Well, unless you have a student who is,
That falls under
It
oil.
falls
And
under
that would
oil.
fall under,
no,
It's like
that's medical.
cannabinoid. I just looked it up, Jackie. The definition's right here. CBD is one of many cannabinoids, or molecules produced uniquely by
I
the
think it
cannabis.
is
It's
covered
covered by
under
the oil.
policy, but
But
I'm not
it's
an
not,
expert.
it's not the same as
My-
medical marijuana.
well, I look at the fact that my daughter, every once in a while, needs Tylenol. You know, she can't carry that in her pocket and just take it as needed. It has to go through,
It would be like
and
an
that,
over-the-counter.
and I see this, that,
Yeah,
it's
well, there's
just not
medical,
something-
well, there's medical marijuana oils. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just CBD only. But it's,
no idea what
obviously, it's not a
But they
conversation in
would-
this.
Yes, and I think Mrs. Zork raises the example of, you know, it's not illegal to have Tylenol, but it is not okay for a student to just carry at random at school.
So I think in the policies, that might be something, I mean, in the procedures, that might be something to indicate that if it is a product that is illegal for a child under 18 to purchase on their own, it should not be allowed in the school
That's
campus.
already in our code of conduct.
Is it? That, in that way? I don't know.
It would already say that if there is an illegal substance, you can't have it on campus. You just can't.
It's a question we'll follow. I can't answer it right.
Yeah, I don't know. But okay, if it is, great.
all right. I think that wraps this up. Good conversations today. We're only halfway through the day, feels like.
Oh, my goodness.
So, you have anything else?
I don't have.
What'd you cook for dinner?
So I do actually have one last thing. We had one other policy on
I'm
the
sorry, we
agenda.
do.
Yeah, that we
Yes, we do.
didn't have
Okay.
time
Yes,
for.
we
Oh,
do.
I'm sorry, Dr.
Yeah.
Shu. Okay.
And I understand we're running late and we don't really have time. I'm sorry, Dr. Moxley, this is for you, not for
No,
me.
no, please, I put it under your name.
Thank you. I had asked Dr. Moxley to put this on the agenda as a racial equity policy. I'm going to be really brief because we can bring it back for conversation at another time. But, Hillsborough County Public Schools recently won a national award for for their racial equity work as a board in their district. They were selected, nationally. One of the things that they have on their website is this racial equity policy. One of the things I would like to see us do as a board is not simply be reactive to what the equity committee is telling us or the legal document is telling us, but to actually take some action ourselves, emphasizing, highlighting, and elevating the importance of this issue to us. So I found this as an example of something that we as a board might want to do and get in front of to demonstrate that we are not simply reacting to what we are asked to do by others, but we are actually taking leadership in this area. I think this is a really good policy. It may or may not be in the format or the language that we want, but I would like us as a board to consider either adopting a policy like this or spending some time reading it and thinking through what policy we would like to adopt. I asked Dr. Moxley if we could bring it forward today because she was bringing forward other policies for us. I knew it wouldn't get approved tonight, but we're on a timeline of when we have to present things to then, be out for 28 days, et cetera. And I wanted to put this on our radar.
I think it's a great idea.
I do too.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I looked at it and it's in line with exactly what we've been asked to do anyway.
I think as a board, you read some of the language in here, and I think there are some things as a board that we frankly would have to work on. For example, in this case, Hillsborough, HCPS leaders will ensure that racial equity guides employees' actions and leads to improved academic results, et cetera. We have to get clear for ourselves what we mean. I know for me what racial equity means to me and all of the work that I've done in that area, but I'm not sure that that's clear for every board member or us as board corporate. But I would like to see us bring this forward and talk about it.
Okay, so my question is, I guess, to Dr. Moxley. Seems like there's board consensus for this, and we're advertising now for policy changes. When is the next policy change, or when would we need to?
So you can do it two ways. One, you can put it in the routine with the others. Those will come probably in January. We're just starting meeting with departments. I do have another one that is a GED, one that needs to be updated. And
civility, respect and civility.
And if you want the civility one, I can do that. I can bring those together as a clump with this one too. You're just doing it outside of the whole big, the whole big block of them. That's not a problem to do. So I can bring those back November 12th to start that process. I do have a question about this one whenever it's appropriate.
Yeah, and if we did this and we could change the HCPS, would this be something that you would do, which you and Ms. DeGresta would do, change the HCPS language obviously to
Right.
SDIRC and et cetera?
And we need to get a number of where it fit.
Yeah.
In it. The question that I had is under ensure systemic equity. It talks about the superintendent shall implement and lead from a system-wide racial equity plan. I want to make sure that what that equity plan is so that we're not having an additional plan.
Well, and that was my question. I'd like to be able to
plan.
discuss this as a board, and we don't have the time.
So
to
I
do that.
think probably what we can do is bring it back on our November 12th meeting, because I think that was the workshop we were going to talk about the equity plan anyways. And I think we need to align things, because what I don't want to do is have 3 or 4 plans on the same thing and then nobody knows what anything is doing.
And what I mostly wanted to do was get this on the board's radar so that as we came forward on the 12th, we could have that conversation and then potentially approve it that night to go forward into the process that we have to do. So, thank you.
All right. So with that, anything else?
No, I think,
All right, so
I thank you.
Thank you. We're going to adjourn at 4:35, and we'll be back at 6 p.m. Thank you, guys.